have a bit of reserve. I don't. Maybe I'm projecting my own values on the world, but people who kind of intrigue you that you don't fully understand, that make you want to know more. And if they can be like that after 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, wow, that's fantastic. But the sense of, I know every single thing about this person, they never surprise me anymore, is what kind of breaks the enchantment and leads to the end of the relationship.
The idea of more to learn about somebody perhaps also suggests that they are continuing to evolve and to forage in the landscape of life.
Yeah.
That they're not fully baked.
Yeah.
Right? Which I think is an interesting idea. During the 4-episode series that we did on mental health, Paul Conti, a psychiatrist, said that a matching of generative drives, which he defined as the desire to create something in the world of one's own expression, is really critical in relationship. And he said, it matters less whether or not one person likes classical music and the other person rock and roll, provided that their relationship to music is similar or something of that sort. Like that it's about a drive of a certain sort to engage in the world. So one person could love music, the other person's not into music, but the way that they approach life is one of perhaps mutual curiosity, desire to find out, etc., and that this exists on a continuum. I'm curious if it seems to jive with what you're saying.
It does, but the only thing I would add is, if you love classical music and they love like heavy metal music, you're going to be driven crazy pretty quickly. It's not going to mesh with you. And I know I would have that problem.
You'll both be in headphones a lot.
Right. So the fact that you both have, because music is like animals in a way. So I agree completely with what you're saying, but I would say maybe music is a best example, because music says something very deep about a person, right? And, I'm not saying one's superior to the other, but it reveals something that's nonverbal, that kind of gives you a window into who they are. So if they like punk rock, like you do, and I grew up on punk rock, there's a rebellion, there's an anti-authoritarian quality that's very strong. You get to see that through them. If they like Mozart and some string quartets, there's somebody that kind of values softness and tranquility and peace. And you're not like that. So the music kind of shows you something, the quality about their character. It can be very telling, it can be very eloquent. And so it doesn't mean that you both have to love the Clash or the Dead Kennedys or whatever, showing my own generation. But that you both have that rebellious streak. And that rebellious streak could be there's classical music composers who can be pretty damn rebellious and angry, and I actually kind of like them. So that convergence, I think, is a positive one, I think. But in general, I agree with that.
I'm curious about the nonverbal communication component of all types of relationships, but let's stay in the landscape of romantic relationships for the moment.
Yeah.
Maybe include professional relationships too, because what you just described is really about a resonance around the nonverbal stuff. I mean, it can be articulated with words. I love animals as music. This is the best song. Like, did you see that? Like, otters are amazing, right? This kind of thing. But language is just an attempt to place, words on a feeling in those instances. So it can be classified as nonverbal. With respect to nonverbal communication, you've written fairly extensively about the fact that people often communicate with their body and facial expressions. I'm certainly familiar with the somewhat, if not very eerie sensation of somebody smiling, like a toothy smile, and then as they pivot away, that smile just dissolving very quickly. And you don't have to be a neuroscientist or a psychologist to realize that there was something quite false about that experience, or that this person experiences emotions like step functions, on, off, which is not how most of us experience emotions. Most of us experience emotions with some pervasiveness. Like, I was happy walking in the door because something happened before, and someone smiled while I'm walking in the door. If I see something shocking and dismaying, of course I'm going to frown. I'm going to wipe away that smile, but those are rare instances. So let's talk about the mouth, the eyes, the face, the body in the context of communication. What are some important things to pay attention to?
There was one thing that I want to go back on as far as convergence. Sense of humor is extremely important, right? So it's not like you both like the same comedians, but if one person likes raunchy humor and the other person doesn't, that's a problem. And also the fact that the person doesn't have a sense of humor or doesn't make you laugh is a very, very bad sign. So I wanted to add that one component.
I'm so glad you did. Someone who can make me laugh has, necessary but not sufficient. But boy, it's approaching sufficient.
Yeah, I'd say so. When it comes to the art of seduction is a nonverbal language that you must master. It's a language of the gifts that you give. It's a language of how you smell. It's a language that you communicate through the eyes, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing you have to understand about the human being is that we evolved for a much longer period of time without words than the small 40, 35,000 years that we have symbolic language. So during that vast period of darkness where we did not have words, we were communicating non-verbally. We were picking up signals from people. We were watching every little detail of their behavior because we didn't have words to decipher it. So it's wired into our brains to have an amazing sensitivity to people's nonverbal communications. We can almost be telepathic that way if we learn that language. The problem is we have the capacity, but we don't develop it at all because we are so word-oriented. You're just listening to people, if you're even listening to them at all. You're just hearing the words, and you're so thinking that the words mean something, the words are sincere, which they're often not. At the same time that you're listening so much to words, people are shuffling in their chair. They're kind of looking away. They're looking at other women or other men. Their voice is kind of trembling when they say something where it shouldn't tremble. Their eyes are dead. The smile is kind of fake. You're not watching any of it. So the most important thing in nonverbal communication, law number one, is pay attention to it continually. Develop the practice of shutting off the words and watching people almost as if you took the television and muted it, right? And just watch their behavior. It's not easy and it's not natural because it's the words. We want to focus on them, right? But your ability to turn that television off, to mute it, will suddenly open up so many things about people. They reveal so much things using their voice, and people are continually oozing out all of their secrets through their nonverbal behavior. You can read them like an open book if you master this language. And I have The Laws of Human Nature story of Milton Erickson. I don't know if you're familiar with Milton Erickson. Perhaps the greatest modern master of nonverbal communication. He was an amazing psychologist. He sort of is the inspiration behind and what's it called? And help me out. Neuro-linguistic.
Oh, the NLP.
I mean, it's kind of a bastardization of his ideas, but he created hypnotherapy. He's the person who created hypnotherapy.
Certainly, hypnotherapy is a valid psychiatric practice. I mean, it's excellent clinical data to support.
Well, Milton Erickson had polio when he was 19, and he was paralyzed. His entire body was paralyzed. He couldn't even move his eyeballs, right? And he sat in bed, and he had a very active mind. And he was going to just die from sheer boredom. And what he did during the 2 years of being paralyzed like that was just watching people's nonverbal communication and making notes in his brain and learning every single. He learned the 20 different forms of yes, the 100 different forms of no, right? Every intonation, how somebody entered the room, how they left the room, how they looked at him with pity or empathy or something. He mastered it. And then he became a psychiatrist and he treated people. They thought he was psychic. He could see everything into them. It's because for 2 years, that's all he could do was observe them. He couldn't speak. He couldn't do anything. Couldn't read anything. So you have that same power, but you don't have polio, obviously. But you have to first pay attention to it, right? It's an amazing thing once you do. It's a lot of fun, actually. And I tell people, go to a cafe one day in your city, wherever you live, and just watch people, because you can't hear them. They're a few tables away. Watch their nonverbal behavior as they interact and see if you pick up cues from them. And there are things that are signs of genuine emotions. So, for instance, an exercise you can do is you go up to somebody from an angle where they can't see you coming up to them, and you surprise them. You go, hey, Mike, whatever. They turn for that second. Their expression reveals how they really think about you. You'll detect if you can pick up micro expressions, and you can. They're only like 1/150th of a second, but they're there. You can express a kind of, as they smile. You can see the little disdain in their eyes, right? Then the mask comes on, right? Or you're talking to them, they're looking at you, but their feet are facing in an opposite direction. That means that they're dying to get away from you, kind of thing. These are signals that you don't necessarily pay attention to. Their posture will tell you everything about their levels of confidence, right? On and on and on. The fake smile, if you can just master the ability to detect the fake smile, it will go wonders for you, because you're able to see what you really want to do is to see the person with a genuine smile, particularly in romantic relationships. Someone whose face lights up, a real smile lights your whole face up. It doesn't light your mouth. These parts of your face go up, your eyes get live. There's like a neuro thing going on in your brain that's changing your whole facial expression. And it means that someone genuinely likes you. They're genuinely interested in you. They're genuinely laughing or connecting to you. Man, if you can see that, it'll help you so much in the romantic realm. And then it'll help you get away from those toxic people that are continually faking interest in you. Because a narcissist, a toxic person, thrives by deceiving you with a charming, alluring front that makes you come into their world, and they can hurt you, then they can do something to you, right? Then they have you in their trap, right? So being able to see that they're not genuinely interested in you, that they're faking it, will help you avoid very toxic relationships. And as I said to you, I don't know if we were on air or not, but deep narcissists have dead eyes. They almost can't help it. They can fake the smile, they can fake everything else, but the eyes, you have to be able to read it, because you say, well, what are dead eyes? You'll know when you see it. There's no life in them. They're like looking through you. They're not looking at you. They're looking through you. What can I get at you? You're what they call a self-object. They're an object for you to use. That's how they're looking. They look at a camera or something.
Yeah, the concept of dead eyes and also alive eyes is so fascinating, because as audience of this podcast will know that, because I've said it too much, but I'll say it again, that the eyes are the only two pieces of your brain that are outside the cranial vault. I mean, they're literally two pieces of brain lining the back of your eyes.
Yeah.
And the dynamics of the pupils, those changes, of course, reflect how bright or dim it is in the room, but they also reflect levels of arousal that are on the millisecond time scale. So as one expresses, words of glee, right, the pupils constrict a little bit, believe it or not, or dilate a little bit. I got it backwards there for a moment. And vice versa, as one feels less excited, moments of despair, expressions of despair, the pupils should get a little bit smaller because arousal is going down. And so I think, we pick up on these things at an unconscious level.
We do.
The deadness of the eyes is kind of the conclusion that pops out at us if we're paying attention.
But the problem is it registers unconsciously, but we don't give it any value to it. We trust our words, we trust our rationality as opposed to our intuitions about people. Sometimes when you meet a person for the first time, signals go up in your brain, something's wrong about them. And then you forget it because you don't trust those initial unconscious signals that your brain is giving you, right? So you have to first kind of trust that these intuitions are very valuable. The other thing is pay deep attention to the tone of voice. The voice, as actors will tell you, is like the hardest thing to fake, right? It's very hard to fake excitement. Your voice either has it or it doesn't. It's very hard to fake confidence. And you can, books have been written about that. I'm not going to go into all the details about it. But the person will reveal so much of the emotions that they're experiencing, particularly levels of confidence. Like a trembling voice or something, or a booming, confident voice, which some people can fake, but often it's very difficult. You can still see through it. And on the level of seduction, men are very, very attuned to the voice of a woman, but we're not aware of it. Because the voice of our mother had an incredible impact on us in early childhood. Her singing, the tone of her voice, that was probably the first seduction that we ever went through. And a woman's voice has tremendous power over us, right? And so hearing a voice that kind of grates or irritates you is something that's a bad sign. That goes deeper than all the characters. But a woman's voice that kind of reminds you of that mother that sing-song you, whatever feeling it was, that's somebody that can very easily seduce you.
There's a place for naming this. It's like subcortical courtship. Below the cortex, as the geeky neuroscientists like myself say. You're getting down below the cortex with all of this stuff. Convergence of real loves and desires. I mean, we express with words. We sense the world using, of course, our cortex, but we're really talking about getting into the subcortical stuff that is the stuff of our history, the stuff of our hardwiring and our uniqueness. I couldn't help but think about the fact that earlier we were talking about the now infinitely vast number of choices of things to engage in, people to engage with, etc. But at the same time, as you were now talking about these micro inflections and the subtleties of voice and bodily communication, that whether or not it's emojis or people sending filtered images or the default to text message communication that is so prominent now, it seems like we now have more choices, so more input, but the sort of qualitative differences between the inputs have been binned into a couple of simple bins. It's as if we've regressed to primary colors only. But the canvas is huge. Or I don't know if that analogy works, but you get the idea. Because ultimately, in order to develop good choices about profession, romantic relationships, friendships, you need a lot of examples and a lot of information that allows you to glean the subtlety. But as long as it's emojis and filtered pictures taken at a particular angle, usually from above, ask for the picture head on and below. Send me a picture of your worst expression. All of that. It seems that there's now increased opportunity for deception. And I don't just mean people misleading others. I also mean us misleading ourselves. Yeah. Like, oh my goodness, how could I be so disappointed yet again about a particular landscape of life? It doesn't just have to be romantic interactions. It could be other landscapes. Like, how could I be fooled? Well, you're fooled because the inputs were deficient. Not good data, as we say.
Well, the thing is, if things are you're immersed in the virtual realm, it's very, very hard to master the nonverbal communication aspect, which is so important. So if you're dating from an app and you're flipping through and then you find that person, you've missed out on the greatest experience of life, which is actually having to go out to a bar or go to a restaurant or go to a social event and have to literally encounter another person and deal with looking at their behavior and kind of assessing who they are. It's a muscle that you have to pay attention to nonverbal communication. And if you're just, going through the emojis or going through the Tinder apps, that muscle completely atrophies. You have no power. You're not able to decipher anything. And that's what's happening with a lot of people who are using these apps. The social skills are like any skill at all. You have to develop. It's a muscle you have to develop. And you've all noticed this probably in your own life. If you've gone through a period where you're kind of retreating, you don't want to be around people, and you spend a month like that, and then you go out, you feel awkward. It takes you like a couple days to get used to being around other people. You say stupid things, your body language is awkward. And then I have But if you're in a situation for months where you're constantly interacting with people, you're on a film set and day in, day out, that skill starts developing. But you have to be out there in the world. You have to be interacting. You have to be looking at people's emotions. You have to be gauging them in real time. We're not built for virtual encounters. We're creatures of flesh and blood. And we need to be looking at each other in the eye and paying attention to all these little details, these nuances that you can only get in person.
Along those lines, what are your thoughts about AI and how that's going to shape our sense of self, sense of others, and relationships? As if that's a topic that could be covered in a series of minutes. But what are your top contour, maybe even deeper thoughts about AI?
Well, I'm gonna piss a lot of people off, but I'm kind of very concerned about it. I mentioned before anxiety, the role that anxiety plays in thinking. You come upon an idea, and you go, yeah, that's so good. Then you go to the next level, and it becomes better. And you go, oh, maybe that's not so good. Then you go to the next level. You go to level 3, and it gets better and better. You have anxiety. Another aspect of intelligence is self-awareness, right? The ability to look at yourself, go, I have biases. I have confirmation bias. I have conviction bias. I have recency bias. I have to counteract these things. I also have a dark side. I have aggression. I have to be aware of how they color my thinking, my emotions. The third quality that goes into intelligence, I'm talking about now intelligence, not artificial. Intelligence is the ability to deal with anxiety and go to a third level. Intelligence is the ability to look inside of yourself and see your own biases. And the third thing is the ability to see a holistic picture, the kind of aha moment that scientists have, where you accumulate all kind of data points, and then out of nowhere an image comes to your mind of, yeah, there's the answer. You see the whole thing, you see the whole gestalt, right? Simone Weil compared it to a square cube. You can only see a cube from one side, or you can never see a square cube. You can only see a side of it. If it's rotating, you're still only seeing sides of it. Only in your mind can you picture the whole thing. So the mind has to go through a process to have holistic thinking. If they can invent a machine that can deal with anxiety and has anxiety and can go to level 3, if they can make a machine that can be self-aware, that can go, the people who program me have biases, therefore I have biases. I also have a dark side because people who program me have a dark side. If this machine can also think holistically beyond all of the data points and all the massive information it's combining, it can have that aha moment. All right, I can see a human consciousness, I can see creativity there. The other thing I would say is, when I was a student at Berkeley, going way back, I was 19 years old, I decided one summer, this is a big paradigm shift for me, I'm going to take this class in ancient Greek. In 6 weeks, they teach you a year of ancient Greek. That means every day you have an exam, every Friday you have a final exam. 8 hours every day of the dead language. I thought this would be the best discipline for me after someone who'd been doing too many drugs, to be honest with you. Okay? And so finally, at one point, they give us this paragraph of the hardest ancient Greek writer of all to read. This was near the end, Thucydides, or Thucydides, as they say. I stared, so I had like the whole night to try and translate one paragraph. I couldn't figure it out. You had to understand the weirdness of ancient Greek, all the endings, the weird ways of thinking. The whole picture, that aha moment was eluding me. At one point, I thought I got it, I translated it, and I gave it to the teacher the next day. I remembered it was this kind of hippie that you'd have at Berkeley, Dennis, classics professor, but also a hippie.
The fact that you knew his first name is very
I can only remember his first name, Dennis. He said, Robert, I can see you're thinking, but you need to go to another level. You didn't have that aha moment. You didn't put the whole thing together. You were close, but you didn't. You have to try harder. And that stuck in my mind forever. Like, whenever I have a problem, I have to think harder. I have to go to that next level. Now, what would happen if I had pulled out my translation of Thucydides and just copied that out, right? Or what would have happened if I put it through ChatGPT and it gave me the translation? That muscle in my brain that I have developed for 40 years that allows me to write books would never have developed. And that muscle is, I don't know the answer here. I have to go to another level. I have to try harder. I have to think. I have to have that engine whirring around, right? But if I just grab for ChatGPT, it's deadened. And then we're going to have a whole generation of people who stop thinking, who don't go through that process. You know, you've heard of Douglas Hofstadter, I think. He said, people train to go to Mount Everest. It takes months. Physical exertion is painful. Then they climb Mount Everest. They see the top. Whoa, what a great moment. He said ChatGPT is the equivalent of taking a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest without any of that training and having the same moment. It's not the same, right? You need to go through that process. You need to go through that pain. And if you just, and the thing of is ChatGPT, we think we're so modern and so sophisticated, but really we're just seduced by magic. You put it in there, you see this go, whoa! It's like magic. It's like a magician, but it's empty. It's like not your brain functioning, right? It's the pagan part of us. We like that kind of magic, as opposed to actually having to go through the thought process itself. So I'm not against having tools. I use tools. I use the internet. I use Google. I'm searching for like some factoid from my book. I find it. I use it. I like it. But I've also learned to develop my brain to think, to get that engine constantly moving. And I'm deeply concerned about people who can't learn a foreign language, who can't master anything, who just immediately grab the first answer and generate. I have concerns.
I am too, and I was thinking a moment ago that, like some people might hear what you just said and say, oh, well, the same thing was probably said about the automobile. Like, how many amazing experiences of walking from one place to another are going to be lost when people start driving from one place to another. But I think the key difference, and this certainly aligns with everything you just said, is that what you're talking about is not just arriving at the same destination. You're saying the destination itself is different when one exerts some effort and experiences some anxiety to get there. So it's not the same as automobile versus horse versus walking versus airplane.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally different because the journey transforms the outcome.
Yeah,
I'm in agreement with you about many aspects of AI. I'm also excited about it in the context of certain things.
I agree with you. It could be a tool, but are we operating the tool, or is the tool operating us, is what I'm talking about.
I am concerned a bit too, especially in the context of what we've been talking about for most of today's discussion, about avatars replacing our online personas too much. The avatarization of ourselves is already taking place through
everyone, we
filters,
just got a couple more minutes. We're waiting,
reduction
and
of
then
emotional
we'll get
expression to
started.
emojis,
So
through reduction of
just hang in there.
language to a diminished
We'll
number
start at
of
the
words to
bottom
explain
of
one's
the hour.
feelings. Prior guest on this podcast, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's an expert in emotions, talked about how the moment that a culture has a word for a particular subset of anxious feelings. So for instance, she taught me that in Japanese, there's a word for the sadness one experiences when they get a bad haircut.
Yeah, I know.
And so that normalizes the feeling and leads to feelings of less despair, as opposed to what now many kids especially grew up learning was, I'm anxious, I'm sad, I'm depressed. In science we say there are lumpers and there are splitters, and they've been arguing for years about, like, is that one brain structure? Well, if I name those two things next to each other, two different things, not only can I name one after myself, which is what tends to happen, so to speak, but when you have too many lumpers or too many splitters, things are either overly simple or overly complex. Then, of course, the right answer, the best use of naming things arrives someplace in the middle.
Right.
That's how a field progresses. Because if you lump things together too much, a field can't progress. You give yourself the illusion that it's progressing, but it's not progressing. But if you split things up into a million different subcategories, like just even the word adrenaline is also called epinephrine. And it has to do with basically people arguing over who got credit. Crazy. It's confusing for decades. Yeah, and then there's another story there that I know far too much about the scientists involved, and there was a love triangle about naming of certain parts of the nervous system. People sleeping with other people's partners and love triangles have created more drama of nomenclature in science. I can do a whole hour on this. In any case, what I'm hearing from you is that we cannot afford to lose our sense of nuance, and also because that sense of nuance taps into what we're really experiencing. And AI threatens that we can become avatars of ourselves.
Well, look at it this way. We worship technology. It's our new religion, okay? And we worship ChatGPT as if it's a god. Seriously, there's religious elements going on here. What we really should worship is the human brain, which is the greatest creation in the known universe, I'm afraid. It is the most complex piece of matter in the entire universe. The number of neurons, the number of synapses, the number of possible connections between neurons is infinite, practically infinite. It is a wondrous instrument. It is so powerful. We've barely scratched the surface of what we can use for it. Let us worship that brain that's in your head.
Okay,
You
I
only have
have
so
30
many years to use it. You
Eastern
only have
time, so let's go
develop
ahead
it.
and get
It
started.
is so wonderful
I'm
and
Marie
powerful.
Jenkins, I'm the
Such
Secretary of
pleasure,
Monarchs, for
so
those
much
that might
power
not
in
know.
life.
And we have a
So,
really great
tools are
presentation for
fine.
you
We all
guys
need
today.
tools. We all
I
need
think you'll
hammers
really
and
appreciate
nails
it, and
saws,
I just
etc.
want to give a
But the
quick
real
little
thing is the hand
introduction
uses it, the brain that
to
connects the hand to the hammer that knows how
Todd
to
Florshay.
do things,
I
you
hope
know?
I say it
I
that
think of
correctly.
the
He
great
is
painter
a
Renoir
national
in
strategic
the 19th
recruiter for
century.
the Department of
He
Treasury,
had like a
and he is going to
stroke
teach
or
us some
something
wonderful
in
things
the last
about
years.
writing
He
your
couldn't
federal
move
resume.
his right arm,
I'll
which
turn
he
the time over
painted.
to Todd.
It was disastrous. So what he did is he put the brush in his mouth and he painted some beautiful paintings that
I'm
way.
fumbling around trying to get all of my
His
buttons to work
brain
correctly.
had mastered the art.
Well, thank you very much, and I
Not his
appreciate
hand, his
everybody
brain
being
had
here
mastered it so well he could actually paint well.
to talk about resume
His
writing.
mouth,
Are you all
because he could
able to
direct
see
it.
the screen? I just want
He
to make
had
sure you're
the
able to see
knowledge.
the slides.
The brain is absolutely incredible. The
Okay.
plasticity
Thanks.
of the brain, which I discovered
All right, so
after my stroke, is absolutely
I wrote these. I wrote this presentation many
Professor
probably one
Schultz
decade ago.
at UCLA was studying
For those of you that don't know
now
me, like Rich said, I'm
certain
in
plasticity
one of two now as of Monday, national recruiter, so working at the Treasury headquarters.
Getting them out.
But I created this presentation back when I used to work at OPM, the Recruitment Policy and Outreach Division. I've since updated it over time, but the gist of it is the same. And basically, I wrote this out of frustration, is why I came up with this presentation. I felt like
shift in our values.
it was really hard to get in the government. I felt like it didn't need to be as hard as it was to get in the government. And I also felt like everything that I had been taught, right? I retired out of the Army. I felt like everything that I had been taught when I was transitioning out was either wrong, or if it wasn't wrong, it was so vague that it may as well have been wrong because it wasn't helpful. And so, I kind of set out, kind of on a plan that there's got to be an easier way to do this. And when I applied, I figured out this process, and it worked. And so I kind of started implementing it. And then I created this presentation. I've been teaching it for, like I said, for over a decade now. It's definitely a different way of looking at resume writing. So if you've never attended one of my courses before, I think you're going to notice that it's a very different approach. A lot of the information is similar to what you might hear elsewhere, but it's more my feeling of, I think there needs to be more than just telling you tailor your resume. I think we really need to do more about like, how do you tailor your resume? What are we specifically looking? How can you stand out amongst the crowd? And that's really what the intention of this is how can you stand out compared to everybody else? Because as you all know, there's a lot of people applying, right? And then that means competition is tough. So main thing I would say to this is, someone's on a hot mic. Can everyone check your mute buttons? But the main thing I would say with this is, I'm going to go through this entire presentation. If possible, I'd like you to hold off questions until the end. I will stick around and answer questions at the end, but I know a lot of you have to get back to work. And it does take me darn near the full hour and a half to do the whole presentation, okay? Because it is a very detailed session. So bear with me on it. And then I'll stick around and answer questions for as long as is needed. I didn't schedule anything afterwards. All right. So with that, we'll jump into what we're going to talk about today. So, it's a little bit different because you're feds already. So you already have an understanding of, what an announcement looks like. You've done, more than likely you've done this process before. However, in order to make sure that everybody gets to the same place when this whole process is done, I'm going to go through everything the same way that I normally go through this. So some of you will say, hey, I already know this, and I got that. But I don't know where everybody's at. So I want to make sure that I cover it all. But initially what I'm going to talk about are these three sections right here. All right. I'm going to talk about the job announcement. The announcement itself has been created. I built it from multiple announcements. So that way I can get my point across when certain things are mentioning, these requirements and others don't mention it. A So I tried to build out something that kind of covered as much as I possibly could. All right. And then I want us to talk about the areas that are important within the announcement, right? That announcement is 5-6 pages long if you print it off, but there's only 3 areas that are really important for writing your resume, and that's where we're going to focus our attention on, all right? Once we get through that and we understand it, you'll notice that there's certain sections. I'm going to mention a few things about it, and then we're going to jump on. If it's not part of, those 3 sections, then we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it for resume writing, right? It's a waste of time. So I'm going to kind of move on beyond that, okay? Then I'm going to talk to you about the 2-part answer, the 2-part response, whatever you want to call it. Understand that there's a way to write your resume that builds a clear picture for the HR people as well as for the hiring official that you are indeed qualified for it and how qualified you are for it. Okay? It's using the keywords and key phrases, and I'm sure you've heard that 100 times, but there's a way to use them that helps you be a little bit more effective, that also helps you to get credit for everything that you've done. This process that I'm going to teach today can be done whether it's a GS1 or somebody applying for a GS15. Obviously, when you get into SESs, you're talking about ECQs. That's a little bit different of a process, right? That's not really the way that you write your resume for that. I'm not an SES expert when it comes to that. But if you're on, that, and I recognize you have an equivalency pay scale, but it's all the same. All right. If you haven't made it to the executive level, this is applicable. Okay. And then we're going to talk about a process it's a 3-step process for tailoring your resume. Right. This is kind of what this all focuses on. After we talk about the announcement, understand the announcement and what's important, talk about how to build your responses in your resume. Then I get into a very detailed process of how to tailor your resume. My frustration was everybody told me to tailor my resume, but when I would say, to what? Nobody would answer the question. Nobody really could answer the question. So I always felt like all these briefings were so generic that it wasn't going to help me out in the long run. Okay, so I'm actually going to walk you through this process that I came up with, because believe it or not, the checklist essentially that HR has, it's in the announcement. It's there. It's just in a different way. You actually have to kind of develop it. It's not hard to do. You're going to see it's actually very underwhelming when you recognize the process. You're going to be like, wow, I didn't realize it would be that easy. It does take a little bit, but I'm going to point out what you do. And again, it's one of those things you're going to be like, okay, I really thought this was going to be more magical, Todd, and it's not. So I apologize right here, right now. But hopefully by the end of this thing, you'll feel a little bit more empowered, feel a little bit more in charge and understanding of what it is that HR is really looking for and how you can make sure that you are meeting that, assuming you have the qualifications, right, but that you're meeting what they're looking for. Because oftentimes what happens is we would write our resumes, we sit down and think, right, you're at the IRS, so you think to yourself, in my current job, what am I most proud of? What do I really, if I was bragging, what would I brag about? And then you write those things out. But the problem is that's not necessarily what they're looking for. It's not that it's not important, it's just maybe that's not what they're looking for. So we're going to cover those kind of things. We will talk about these summaries and objectives. We'll talk about cover letters. We'll talk about length of resume, how far back you should go, those kind of things. That's all going to get covered, all right? Just you got to give me time to get to it. All right, so when we look at the job announcement itself, this example that we have up here, if you look at the big dark blue spot, it was an auditor job. Department of Treasury is the main organization. The OIG owned it. All right. Down below that, you have several, letters or tabs, if you want to call them that. Right. Summary. This job is open to, so on and so forth. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to do this because it's a distraction for me. I'm sitting here looking at myself talking. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to shut the camera off. I'll turn it back on at the end, but I don't really think there's any value added if you're seeing me with my hands moving all over the place as I do. But you can click on any of those and it takes you right to the section, or you can simply scroll through the announcement. It's totally up to you. The summary section theoretically summarizes what you're going to have for a job, but oftentimes it more summarizes what the agency is, and more specifically, when you click on learn more about this agency, that actually leads you to, using an agency site. Sometimes there's information there. I always say it's not important for resume writing, but it is helpful if you get offered an interview, you do want to go back and read it because somebody thought it was important enough to put in there. All right. The apply button, pretty self-explanatory. Click it. It takes you through the 5-step process. You've got print, share, and save. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And then you got the top portion of overview. Now we're going to talk about overview on the next slide, but I just want to mention this right now. In green, you see it says accepting applications. So that's just the status of whatever the job is at that time. It will change over time. Okay. And then you have opening and closing dates. So the job opens up on a certain date and it closes on a certain date at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. All right. Seems like how hard could that be? Sometimes you see boxed in red. Sometimes an agency or bureau will put a limit on the number of applications that they're willing to receive. In this example, it's 100. So I point this out because usually it's right underneath the opening and closing dates. I point this out if they're going to do this because that means you probably need to hurry up and get your resume submitted. All right. My rule of thumb, if I see that and it's a low number, I've seen them as low as 25. From a recruiting perspective, I don't think that's a good practice, but I don't run everybody's recruitment, so whatever. But if I see one that's a low number, I'm going to go ahead and take whatever resume I already had for that occupation. Like say I've already tailored it one other time at another job for an auditor. I'm going to just take that one and really quickly apply. That way, at least I have the resume submitted. But then I'm going to take, the next couple hours and I'm going to tailor my resume, which we'll talk about. And then I'm going to go back in and update my application. I'm going to put in my new updated resume. Only reason I would do that is just on the uneventful chance the job closes quickly and I don't get an opportunity to apply. I've at least, with a tailored resume, I've at least turned in a resume. It may not be as effective, but I might, who knows, maybe it's tailored enough, okay? So I just tell you this just to be aware of it because, again, sometimes jobs close faster than what you're anticipating. So this is great information to know, but it's not important for writing our resume, so I'm going to move on. The overview section, this is what it looked like on the left-hand side. I have terrible eyes, so I blew it up on the right-hand side. It's a little bit easier to read. All right. At the top up there, you see salary and pay scale and grade. You are all familiar with the fact that there's a whole plethora of different types of pay scales that are out there, right? I know IRS has a different pay scale, and of course OCC does as well. But for this training purposes today, we're calling this one GS, right? GS 7-9 basically means you can start as a 7 or as a 9 based off of your qualifications, whatever your experience level is. And of course, salary is the bottom of the GS pay scale to the top of the GS 9 pay scale, just so that way everybody knows what the deal is with that. The location, pretty simple. They were offering a few different vacancies, only in one location, right? Remote and telework. I would assume that you all understand what that is, right? Remote means that your duty location is typically your home, and then your locality pay is based off of that. Telework, your duty location's in the office, whatever the office space is, and your locality based off of that. Whether there is travel required, whether they offer relocation expenses, that's up to them. The appointment type is basically the authority being used that we're hiring you off of. In this case, this was a Pathways recent grad position, right? So they're using Schedule D to hire from it. It's not necessarily really that important that you worry about that. It just make you aware of it. Work schedule, full-time, part-time, whatever. Just make sure that you're applying to something that you actually are interested in. Service, I assume that you're familiar with this, but you might not be. There are 3 types of services. There's competitive service, there's accepted service, and then there's senior executive service. Of course, competitive service is a large majority of the jobs in the federal government, but hiring and promotions all happen specifically based off of what the rules state, right? There are specific rules for hiring, there's specific rules for promoting, and you can't deviate from those. Accepted service, there are exceptions granted. Hiring can be different, the promotions can be different, right? Not really a big deal, but it does affect you as to whether or not you get status, right? Whether you can apply under merit promotion when we post. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And then, of course, you have senior executive service, which are the executives that run everything, all right? Excuse me. Below that, you have promotion potential. In this case, it's a GS 13, right? So it's a career ladder. This job goes anywhere from a 7 to 9 all the way up to 13 without having to reapply and recompete. So jobs that have promotion potential are worthwhile looking for. I'm not saying to not consider other jobs, but I am just saying that it's worthwhile taking a look at those a little bit harder because you don't have to compete all the way up to the GS this 13 level in this example. All right. Job, family, and series. As we all know, we have a 4-digit code for our occupational series, right? I'm a 0201, right? HR specialist with a focus on recruitment. So I'm in the 200 series. This was an auditor job. So the auditor job's in the 500 series. What's in the 500 series? Well, pretty much everything relating to money, right? Budget, finance, accounting, auditing, those types of things. So in that case, you know, maybe you're an auditor, but you might be interested in possibly something else where you could look at what's the family like, because oftentimes the requirements are going to be similar. Not exactly the same, but similar. Supervisory status, yes or no, security clearance, drug test, right, those kind of things. That's all great to know, but it's not really that important right now. Announcement number I'd like to point out, because if you have a question for HR and you're going to email them, include that announcement number. If you don't, oftentimes, especially if it's an IRS job, HR has a lot of jobs posted out there. They may not know which job you're talking about. You might be saying, I want to apply for the auditor job. They might have, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 20 auditor jobs out there. Okay, so tell them which one it is by giving them the announcement number. Control number is for internal usage. You don't need to worry about that one. So same thing, like great information, not important for resume writers, so we move on. The overview part, second part of this is that who's the job open to? So this is where we talk about eligibility. Very big difference in eligibility and qualifying for something, or being qualified, okay? First thing that HR looks at when somebody applies is, were you eligible to apply? Because not everyone's eligible to apply for every job. So in this case, it's open to the public. You got to be a U.S. citizen or a national, and you can apply. So most of us, right, are able to apply. However, we have other jobs that are posted out there, and that's delegated examining, just so we're clear for the technical term. Then we also have a lot of other jobs that are posted under merit promotion. Merit promotion is for current and former feds of the competitive service. Keyword, of the competitive service. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, it means if you served for 30 years in the accepted service, and aside from some exceptions, which I'll explain real quick, if you serve 30 years in the accepted service, you are not going to get status, and status is what's going to allow you to apply for one that is under all current and former feds of the competitive service. You're still a fed, but because you were hired differently and you were promoted differently, they're not going to give you the ability to compete against those that were just in the competitive service. Okay, it's basically what it comes down to. So just kind of be aware of that. Now, there are exceptions to that. If you're a veteran and you're eligible under the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act, or VEOA, then you are able to apply. For those of you that don't know, Veterans Preference applies under delegated examining, the all U.S. citizens. Veterans Preference does not apply under merit promotion. Right? And if you are a veteran applying under VEOA, we kind of gave you your preference by being allowing you to apply this to a job that's for current and former feds, even though you're not a current or a former fed. Now, mind you, many of you on here would be eligible to apply just because of the fact that you have status. Okay, but just be aware of it. We do have different hiring authorities, which means different rules. So this is why I always say, if we post a job twice, which happens a lot, one time under merit promotion, where it's for current and former feds, and one time for delegated examining for all U.S. citizens, and you know that you're able to apply, you're eligible to apply under both, you need to apply twice. Even though it's the same resume and it's the same answers to the same questions, you apply twice. Because there's different hiring rules. Same thing goes when we say if you're eligible under 30% or more disabled veterans, you give us all the information that we need. That's important because there are different rules. Okay? So you apply to as many of the things, or you make yourself eligible for as many of the things as you possibly can, even though you're thinking this is kind of redundant. And I got it. But we have to follow the rules. So keep that in mind when you're going through this hiring process and you're applying. All right? Great information to know, but not resume focused. So let's move on. Duties. The duties basically describe the position that you're applying to. It helps you to visualize the job and determine, do I think it's a good fit or not? This should be the window into the job itself and what you'll be expected to do on a daily basis. All right? So remember I told you in the beginning that I'm going to talk to you about what areas in the job announcement are actually important to write in your resume. Right? And there's only 3 sections that are important out of the whole thing. This is one of those sections. All right? And believe it or not, though, this is the least important out of the 3. Oftentimes people assume, well, this is what I'm going to be doing. It's got to be the most important, but it's not. And the reason is because while this stuff is important, this is what you will be doing if you get the job, not necessarily what you have to have experience in already. So how do you know that that's the case? Well, you take a look at the example I've got here. Look at the first paragraph. You read through it. Eventually you see you will be responsible for 1, 2, and 3. So there's 3 things it's saying as a 7 or a 9 you're going to be responsible for. Okay? Simple and easy. However, look at the next sentence. At the full performance level of the position, additional responsibilities included, and it lists off 4 things. Okay, well, I'm hiring you as a 7 or a 9 in this example. Full performance level was a GS13, right? Can I expect that you've already done GS13 level work, even though I'm hiring you as a 7 or a 9? I mean, what a good deal it would be for the hiring manager, right? But that's not the way we operate. So we don't expect that you already have that experience, okay? We just know that that's what you're going to do if you get the job. So let me throw this at you, though. What if you've done some of this? You know, looking at that first paragraph, what if you've got experience doing 1 and 2 and you don't have experience in 3? Why would you not tell me that you've already got experience? Give me an example of how you did number 1 and number 2. Why wouldn't you tell me that? Because then I know you can hit the ground running. I can't have you doing all 3 things from the day that you start, but I could have you doing 1 and 2. I could get you engaged, right? You could become integrated with the team very quickly. I could keep you busy doing stuff like 1 and 2, and over time teach you 3. Can everybody see how that might be a selling point for a hiring official, why they might actually appreciate that? So I call the duties the niceties. They're nice to have. They're not required, but they're nice to have because it shows that you can hit the ground running. And oftentimes that could be the little bit that pushes you over the edge compared to somebody else, okay? So remember, these are the least important out of the 3. This is number 3 on a list. But they are nice to have, so we do want to address it when we get to it. We'll come back and talk about what do I mean by that as we go, all right? Requirements. The requirements section can greatly vary as to what's in there, but basically it's additional things you have to do or you have to have in order to apply for the job itself. All right, it might be security clearances, financial disclosures, any number of other conditions that they say you need to meet. And while this is all neat and wonderful, it's not important for resume writing, so I'm going to just keep moving on. Qualifications. Qualification section is one of those 3 important sections when you write your resume. As a matter of fact, it's the most important section out of the 3 because they are non-negotiable. And I do mean non-negotiable. You literally either have these or you don't. And there's no gray area in between. Okay? Most of what you see in the qualifications is clipped directly from the OPM qualification standards. All right, so when I tell you that I would like to tailor your resume every time that you apply for a job, and for a lot of people that, you know, there's grumbles and you say, oh my gosh, I like to be honest with you. The first time that you write your resume the way that I'm going to show you, it is going to be painful. And I say painful, meaning it's going to take you a couple hours if you do it right. However, if you invest in yourself for a couple hours and you write your resume for an auditor and you apply to that first job, and let's say you don't get it, the next time you see an auditor job posted, when you go to apply for it, you're only going to need to tweak that original resume that you tailored to that other job. You're only going to need to tweak 10% of it, maybe 15 tops. Because most of what's in there is going to be identical to the other job because it comes directly from the OPM qualification standards. What we don't allow, you see this a lot in the private sector, we don't allow them to all of a sudden say, well, you know what? I think they should have a master's degree. Why? Because it'll reduce the number of applicants down. We are not allowed to do that. If OPM said there's a degree required or a positive education requirement, then there is a degree required. If OPM said there's not one required, by the way, as an HR specialist, there's no degree required, GS1 through GS15. Right now I have a degree. Nobody cares, but I have it. Right? Hiring official might like it. That's possible. But it is not a requirement. Okay? It doesn't qualify me for the job. So, if there's no degree required, the only exception can be under pathways, which we do allow it because you have to be a student or a recent grad. But in normal circumstances, that's not going to be the case, all right? And so if they tell you you have to have a degree, you have to have a degree. If they tell you that one is not required, then one is not required. It can count towards additional experience. So it's not that it was a waste of time. But you only have to go back in and tweak that little bit. So it's not painful to second, third, fourth, fifth time down the road, unless you wrote your resume for an auditor job and all of a sudden you decide I want to be an HR specialist. Okay, two totally different fields. Now you're going to have to spend a couple hours writing your resume and tailoring it to get it to where it needs to be, so you have a base resume essentially for that. Okay, just kind of keep that in mind. That would be the only time that it would kind of turn back into that. So when we go and look at this on here, this example says you have to have a degree. You got to have a bachelor's degree or higher in accounting or in a related field, and you got to have 24 semester hours of accounting type classes or a combination of education and experience. And then they list off examples of what that might look like. And it went on and on and on. If you've never set foot in college, there's no way to qualify for this job. None. HR can say, yeah, look, the resume says they have 30 years of being an auditor. They probably know what they're doing. I got it. But if you don't at least have some college with your experience, we can't do anything with you. The rules don't allow it. Okay, and in some cases you might say, well, that doesn't make sense. I understand, but they don't give HR an opinion. HR does everything very matter of fact. Okay, if you're not aware of it, HR does get audited. OPM comes and audits it. The MSAC is the arm that comes out and audits. All right. So if we say there's a requirement, there's a requirement. All right. Now, qualifications is the number one most important section, but it's actually broken up into two areas. It's broken up into education, and we'll talk about experience on the next slide. But I do like to point something out when you're applying. Okay. Be careful. Some of you have more than a bachelor's degree. Some of you have a master's, maybe even a PhD. So the norm is, if you have a master's, when we ask you for transcripts, you turn in your master's transcript, right? That's the norm. Here's the problem. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you have a bachelor's in accounting. You have a master's in international business. So you go and say to yourself, all right, well, I have a bachelor's in accounting, so I'm qualified with that. You turn in your master's transcript, which, by the way, unofficial transcript when you initially applied. You turn in your unofficial transcript for your master's degree in international business. So even though you wrote on your resume you have a bachelor's in accounting, I don't have any proof of it with a transcript. So what I do have is an international business master's transcript. So I can say, okay, so it's a related field. I'll give you that. Now I'm looking for 24 semester hours of accounting classes. Do you think that 24 semester hours of accounting classes shows up on that master's degree for international business? I'm going to tell you it doesn't. So all of a sudden, you're not qualified. Even though you are, because you have a degree in a bachelor's in accounting, you just didn't give me the proof. So I tell you this because if you have a master's or a PhD, give me your bachelor's, give me your master's, and give me your PhD. Will they all get looked at? Maybe not. It doesn't hurt anything. Put them in one PDF. Give them everything that you've got when it comes down to that to make sure that they understand you at least meet the minimum requirements, which is what they're looking for. And then if you want to show off a little bit because you have a master's, and I say that seriously, or a PhD, good on you, then go ahead and include the other ones. But at the very least, give them what they're looking for is where I'm going with this. Don't give them an opportunity to turn you down because you didn't give them the information, all right? So hardest part about qualifications is the experience side of the house. The experience side of the house is where we get into tailoring our resume. All right. Now, in fact, we're going to be using this slide quite a bit when we get towards the end of the presentation and the process. I do like to mention that you have to work with me on this. I'm working within the limits of my technology, which is PowerPoint and Teams. Okay. So you'll notice GS9 looks like it's cut off. It is. Because I'm going to use this slide later, and as I use it, GS9 is going to get pushed down towards the bottom of the slide. Okay. So it is what it is. I can't do anything about it. It's just the way that the system is going to end up working. But when we look at specialized experience on here, if you look at your screen, the first paragraph actually just tells you where you might find some of the information. They're saying it could be paid or unpaid. The second paragraph, none of you should ever see the second paragraph, I would imagine, because you're already fed. Basically, second paragraph only comes in an entry-level position where they say you have to have the ability to do something. I really dislike the ability to do something because I laugh to myself and say, if you came to me and said, Todd, do you have the ability to do this? I'd be like, yes. Yes, I do. I don't really feel like that's effective. Then you get down into what would be the GS7 and what would have been the GS9 had it not gotten cut off, where they say you have to have 1 year of graduate level education or 1 year of experience equivalent to the next grade down, which was a GS5, and here's what it looks like for experience. And then they list off a bunch of experience. Okay? So those are things that we actually have to address and we have to focus on. I'd like to point out the difference between government, federal government, and private sector. Because there's a big misunderstanding with it, right? I know a lot of people that get frustrated with this. So in the private sector, very, very common for a manager to come down to HR or the recruiter, however they're run, and say, I need to hire somebody. And they'll say, okay, how much are we paying them? So in other words, like, for our sense, what's their pay grade, right? They obviously don't use that, but whatever, let's say for the sake of our argument, what's their pay grade? And the manager says whatever the grade is or whatever the level is. Then they usually say, okay, well, what are the expectations? Like, what's the experiences that you're saying they have to have? And the manager will list off, let's say, 8 things. Oftentimes, the HR person will come back to them and say, there's nobody that's going to have all 8 of those skills or experiences that's going to come in and be paid at the level that you're saying. Like, that's a huge wish list, everybody. That's not happening. And what does the manager say? The manager usually will say, just get me close. Because they know they're not going to get all 8 things. So you and I are always taught when applying to private sector jobs, if you've got 5 of the 8 things, 6 of the 8 things, 7 of the 8 things, it's worth applying because they know they're not going to get all 8 of them because it is a wish list. And that very well could be true for private sector, but we're government, we're not private sector. We don't have a wish list. Quite the opposite. All right, for us, it's really important to understand that what's listed are the minimum qualifications. I would take it a step further and tell you it's the bare bones minimum qualifications. So let's put that back into that same scenario. If we list 8 things off in the federal government, and you have 5 of the 8, 6 of the 8, or 7 of the 8 experiences you could talk about, but you don't have all 8, do you meet the minimum qualifications for the job? The answer is no. You're not qualified for it. If you don't give them all 8 things, you are not qualified for that job. You have to give them all 8 things. That is, I kid you not, that's how cut and dry this is. Okay? That's why you'll see this process I'm going to teach is going to be important to making sure we address everything that they say that we need to address. All right? So we do things very differently than the private sector does. We don't have a lot of latitude. We don't have a lot of leaning left and right. We definitely don't, HR is not given an opinion in this. Obviously, hiring officials have an opinion, but HR is not given the opportunity to have an opinion, okay? So we have to address this. So I'm going to come back to this slide a little further down when we talk about the process. I just want to bring it to your attention. But remember, number one most important is going to be the qualifications, specifically the experience part of this, okay? Number 3 most important is the duties. Those are the niceties, and we're missing the one in the middle, which we'll get to here in a second. All right, additional information basically has an education spot on there where if you earned your degree overseas, they're telling you it's your responsibility to go get it certified that it meets the U.S. equivalency, and you can go to the Department of Education link and go through that process. I believe it's a paid process. You have to pay for it, but you have to do that before you apply. Additional information, it's whatever they want to put on there. It's kind of a crapshoot as to what you get. It's good to know, but it's not important for resume writing, so we're going to move. Okay, benefits. I think you all know this. The benefits, for the most part, are the same regardless of where you go. There are some differences, especially like telework or remote work or things like that. I always say great information to read and understand to know what you're getting into, but not important for resume writing, so we're going to move on. How you'll be evaluated. They're telling you how they're going to evaluate you in this process. Okay, in this example, they're saying we're going to use category rating. Category rating is used by competitive service, all right? This is an accepted service position that's going to be converted to competitive service, so they're using category rating, which is basically a requirement. You don't need to understand category rating. Just know this: when they're rating and ranking you, they're putting you into one of 2 categories at a minimum, but typically 3 categories. And they can call the categories whatever they want, right? They can call them 1, 2, 3. They can call them ABC. There's a song in there somewhere if you've been around for a day or 2 like I have. Let's see if anybody gets it. What they normally call them, fairly common, is what you see in the center of your screen, which is qualified, well qualified, best qualified. You have to get in the best qualified category in order to be referred to the hiring official. So if you've ever received a note that said you were qualified but not referred, well, that would be because you were in the qualified category or you were in the well qualified category, but you did not make the best qualified category. All right, so they did not refer you. I often thought, how can I be qualified and you just, I guess, decided not to refer me? But it's all what the meaning of the word is. They figure out in advance what the scoring is going to be so they can understand, before they post a job, this is what we're going to score people at. And in this example, you got to get a 92 or above in order to be in that top category, okay? Then down at the bottom there, circled in red, it says, you may preview questions for this vacancy. These are the occupational questionnaire or vacancy questions, all right? Number 2 most important section when writing your resume. So it's number 2 most important because most of the questions will relate directly back to the qualifications that I said were non-negotiable. All they're trying to do is get you to tell them a little bit more information. That little bit more information would be things like, how well do you do this? What is your skill level? All right. Level is an important piece of writing your resume. Over time, your level increases, right? The skill set increases. The responsibility increases. So that's what this occupational questionnaire does. Here's an example of it. Which of the following best describes your experience verifying the accuracy of computations? Verifying the accuracy of computations is actually one of the things in the qualifications. They're just asking you to describe your experience. So they're looking for what level of experience do you actually have. And they give you 5 examples of what that might look like. The first piece is, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, never heard of it, don't know anything about it. Now you might see something like that if you were to hire somebody, under, say, Pathways as an intern in their first year of college, right? That's very possible, but we expect that. We're not looking really for a whole lot. The second one is, well, I actually had training or education in it, but I've never done the job, for real. That might be somebody who's at the end of college, they're almost done, or they recently graduated and they have not gone out there and performed the actual job. The third one is I actually performed the job, but I haven't done it for very long and I'm not great at it yet. I still have to ask for a lot of help. We understand that. That's an entry-level type thing. The fourth one is I'm actually pretty good at it. Only every once in a blue moon do I need to get kind of confirm with somebody else above me. But for the most part, I got a handle on this. And then the last one is, I'm the subject matter expert. I know it backwards, forwards, upside down, and I'm the one everybody comes and asks when they can't figure it out. Now, I know what everyone's taught. You're taught, mark that bottom one. Mark, you're the best of the best of the best. Can you pass a computer system? Sure you can. You can fool a computer system. But guess what? HR goes back and confirms your answers. They bump it with your resume. So if your resume doesn't support your answers, they're going to change your score. So I usually tell people, just be honest on these, because you're not saving anything. It's going to give you false hope initially, right? If you're qualified for it, great. Say that you're qualified for it. If you're the best, then say you're the best. But if you know in your heart of hearts, every once in a while I still do need to ask for help, then you need to mark that off. Doesn't mean that you're out of the running, but it does mean that you need to make sure that your resume is supportive of whatever your answer is. Okay, so number 2 most important section, because it's typically asking you to expand on what the qualifications are, usually around level. Okay, so we got a couple more sections we go through that are not resume important, but I just want to point out required documents. If we tell you you need to submit something, you need to submit it. As a veteran, if you're applying for veterans preference or you're trying to gain it, then you got to turn in a D214. Non-negotiable, you got to turn it in. I will tell you, black out your social, black out your date of birth. You don't need to give up your PII and post it out there on USA Jobs and let it sit there until you finally apply. And while USA Jobs says they're safe, I'm sure they are. I've been the victim of identity theft for over 30 years. It comes back and haunts me every so often. I'm not interested in putting my social or my date of birth out there from my D214 or my college transcripts or anything else. I will give them those copies if I'm selected, right? I give them an unofficial copy until that point in time. So kind of keep that in mind. If they ask for an SF50 because it's under merit promotion, you got to turn it in. If you don't turn it in, it's an incomplete application. So whatever it is that you need to turn in, they will tell you what the required documents are. You have to make sure you turn them in. How to apply, basically, is telling you this is the process you're going to go through. It's great information. It's not important for resume writing, so I'm going to kind of move on. how to contact the agency. If you have a question about, the announcement, ask the question as early on as possible, because these people get inundated with, emails asking all sorts of crazy things. I get them on these briefings when I do them to the public. People will ask me questions that have nothing to do with not just resume, but or even hiring. I sometimes will have people that are just angry at Treasury for whatever reason, and they will go on and on and on. HR gets the same stuff, right? And they try to go through and answer everything. So make sure that you ask the question as early on as possible. Next steps is what happens after you apply. Again, kind of the same thing, gives you a background and understanding of it. It's good information, but it's not resume writing focused, so we're going to move on. I put this slide on here because I will make sure I'll work. We'll work to make sure you can get a copy of the slides. I've got them on PDF, so I'll send them over when we're done with the briefing. There's another document too that I'll send over as well, kind of a supporting document. But I put this on here on purpose, so that way, if you walk away today and you forget what were those 3 areas, Todd said were important, there they are. Qualifications, number 1 most important because they're non-negotiable. Questionnaire, number 2 most important because it typically relates back to the qualifications, just asking about level and things. Duties, number 3 most important because they're the niceties. You don't have to have them, but if you do, we want to talk about them because it can show you can hit the ground running. All right? So your resume is the best marketing tool. Quite frankly, it's your only marketing tool. I'm not sure what else is going to market you, at least initially, right? Until you get to the interview. But it needs to communicate that you're qualified for the job. We're going to tell you what those qualifications are. You need to show me that you are indeed qualified, okay? If you can show the HR people that you can hit the ground running, which is providing immediate results, like in the duties, that is to your benefit. That helps to make you stand out. That's the goal with this presentation, is how can we get you to stand out amongst the crowd? Should be tailored for each job. When I originally wrote this, I said must be tailored for each job. And the OPM lawyers came back and said, no. You cannot say must, because must insinuates you're not allowed to apply if you don't do it. And so then they were right. That's not a true statement. Frankly, you could apply with a blank piece of paper. Nobody can stop you. Right now, to be clear, I don't recommend applying with a blank piece of paper. It's not going to get you anywhere, right? If you don't tailor your resume to the job, the odds of getting the job are slim, very slim. And I know how frustrating that can be, especially when you're trying to look to move or shift or get promoted or whatever the case is. So you need to tailor it. And again, I'm going to show you a fairly easy way of tailoring, okay, that's effective. Go back 10 years on your resume. That's the norm. Now, here's what I would say. I've been in recruiting now for 22, 23 years. I go back 22, 23 years. I'm very, very detailed in my first 10 years, meaning my most recent 10 years. I get less specific in anything outside of 10 years. The jobs that I hold that are older than 10 years, I might only pick out 1 or 2 highlights to talk about because I focus everything on the last 10 years. All right, but I do like to tell them that I've got more than 10 years of experience, which leads me over into the length. There's a couple bureaus out there that are using 5 pages as the requirement. All right, there are other agencies out there using 5 pages. The norm is they're only going to look at the first 5 pages to determine qualifications. The manager will look at the entire resume, but 5 pages or less to determine qualifications. So I use that as the rule of thumb. Make sure that you meet the requirements, those qualifications in the first 5 pages. If you need to go beyond that after that, that's fine. But make sure that you hit all the wickets that need to be hit showing you're qualified in the first 5 pages so you don't get knocked out of contention. All right? Think about this, though. I see some resumes out there that have been ridiculously long. All right? Years ago when I was at OPM, I was brought in to help determine who should be interviewed. It wasn't for my boss, it was for somebody else. And we were going through resumes, and I came across a resume that had been printed off, and it was 18 pages long. But just to add to it, they had uploaded the resume, and it was 8 font. It was so hard to read. I have bad eyes. It was so hard to read. So the supervisor there said, do me a favor, copy it, paste it over to a Word document, so that way we can blow it up to 11 or 12 font. I can't remember which one it was. But that's common. And when I did, it was 35 pages long. This person talked about every single thing they had ever done in their adult life. Like if they held a job for 2 days, it was on there. All right, that's not an effective use of space and time. So just understand that this is your first and only impression, right? We want to make a good impression. We don't want to upset them. My resume tends to go 6 to 7 pages when I include, references and things in it. But like I said, the majority, like my 10 years is definitely in the first 5 pages. Okay, and I'll meet the qualifications if I'm applying for it in the first 5 pages. So just kind of keep that in mind. Formatting, we want you to go reverse chronological order. You start with your current most recent job at IRS right now, and you work your way backwards. That way your current one pops up first, okay? Paid or unpaid, nobody cares whether a paycheck came along with it. What we care about is it relevant to the job that you're applying to? The example I use is this. I've been in recruitment for a long time. Let's say I hadn't though. When I was applying to OPM years ago, one requirement was must have 1 year specialized experience presenting information to groups of people. It was very generic. It didn't say what level I had to work at, anything else like that, just 1 year of presenting information to groups of people. So let's say I had no experience whatsoever, right, working. However, up until January, for the 12 years prior to this last January, I have been involved in Boy Scouts of America. I have been a Scoutmaster numerous times, and I just recently gave up being a venturing crew advisor, right? That's for the high adventure stuff, for the older kids. If I ask myself, have I ever done anything where I wasn't paid, where I was presenting information to groups of people? I did with BSA. They might have been 11 years old, but I was still presenting information to groups of people. Now, mind you, I got a prorated because I didn't do it on a full-time basis, but I could write that out as a job, and I could give myself however many hours a week approximately that I actually did this, right? And then it can add up over that 12-year period. So it could be something I could take credit for, even though I was never paid for it. But let's just say for the sake of argument, I did that stuff with BSA, but I was applying to be an auditor. And the auditor's not asking about standing up in front of people and presenting information. Well, then do you think it is worth my time to write out like it's a job that I volunteered with BSA and I stood up in front of people and presented information? For an auditor, it's not going to matter. No one's going to care. They're going to probably feel like this is a waste of everybody's time. Okay, so hopefully everybody gets that. Relevancy is important. It needs to be relevant to the job that you're applying for. Now, there's 3 types of resumes that I usually lump into and say these are what we get. We get the general information only resume, we get the experience only resume, and then we get what we really want, which is experience and accomplishment. Remember, I told you we're going to talk about a 2-part answer, a 2-part response, right? That's ideal. So I'm going to walk you through each of these. The general information only one is your typical 1-page or page-and-a-half resume that everybody is taught in the private sector. That's what you got to have, right? Just kind of get to the point, and we'll work out the details in the interview. Might work in private sector, totally does not work in public sector. Only time I see something like this work is if it's a very basic entry-level internship job where the student just doesn't have a whole lot to talk about. But we're also not expecting you to have much of anything, right? We're actually anticipating that you're just a student, and that's the requirement, is you got to be a student, okay? It's too vague. It's typically too vague to actually get selected off of anything. It doesn't capture the qualification, so I do not recommend this at all, okay? Even if you are entry level, there's some things out there that you probably did that you could utilize this, maybe even as a volunteer. Typically, it takes you to 2 pages, if not a little bit more, all right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Not a big recommendation for this one. Experience only. Can you get selected off an experience only resume? You sure can. As a matter of fact, this is mostly what we see, where somebody gives us their experiences, but we don't know how well they do it. We just know they can physically do it, or they have physically done it, okay? I'm not here to teach you how you can get by in the best case scenario. I'm here to teach you how you can stand out amongst the crowd, because sometimes the crowd's pretty big. So experience is a part of what I'm looking for. So we're going to talk about it on this slide, and then we will move on and talk about the accomplishment on the next slide, okay? 2 parts to experience, amount and level. They're critical, okay? Amount is pretty easy. You're going to give me the date that you started, right, month and year, and the date that you ended, month and year. I can add up how many months and years you actually have, and everything that is listed under that job tells me you have 4 years of experience doing the following things. So now I know you've got 4 years, okay? You could write it out as well, along with the dates, because you have to do the dates. like you see the sentence up there, right? Manage an 8-person team over 15 years. If you want to highlight 15 years, that's great. You can do that. Or 8-person team, that's perfectly fine. But your dates are what the HR people are focusing on, okay? Because they're going to know that everything below that is going to be what the, what you now have, let's say, again, 4 years of experience doing, or in this example, 15 years of experience doing, all right? And they're going to add that all up. And I'm going to apologize right now. I don't know if you can hear it, but I just realized that the neighbor is cutting the lawn. So I'm hearing this loud mow as they're going by. They're right near my window. All right. Level of experience. Level is something that increases over time. You start off typically at a lower level, and over time responsibilities are given to you, and you start to increase that level. In this example, what was required was probably experience advising and briefing. And then you go and say, well, I routinely advised and briefed, past tense, organizational senior executive. We can all understand a senior executive is senior level, very high level. Okay? So the level is important because it helps to raise that up. Sometimes they ask about the level and sometimes they don't. All right? But it is important to try to throw that in there, especially if you've done this similar work over time. Which leads me to repetition. It says repetition is okay. It's not only okay, it's encouraged. So what do I mean by repetition? I don't mean write the exact same example on every job that you've done that kind of work with. What I mean is use the same key words and repeat them in the jobs that you've done that type of work. So an example of this is my personal example. When I was applying to OPM, I told you already, one of the skills they said I had to have was 1 year specialized experience presenting information to groups of people. So the key word is presenting. That's the action, right? So, and you can even say presenting information if you wanted to. But that's the key word. Now, I'm going to word it as presented, past tense, because I've already done it. So I need to think about, all right, so how, they say I got to have at least 1 year presenting information, so how have I presented information? And I'm going to walk you through real quick, again, when I was applying to OPM, but I'm going to walk you through what I wrote down, and I'm going to do it chronologically. Keep it in mind, I told you that on your resume, you're going to start with your current job and go reverse chronological, but I want you to see how my level increased, okay? So, 100 years ago, right, and I always apologize right off the bat, right up front, 100 years ago, I was the dreaded Army recruiter. Right? I was that dude that maybe put you in, who knows? But I was really good at it, all right? And so I had a lot of accomplishments, but none of it matters if it's not important to the agency itself. OPM said I had to have experience presenting information to groups of people. So how did I present information to groups of people? Kind of in two ways. The first is, you sit down with the high school or the college student, and oftentimes with their parents, so maybe 3 people there, and you talk about the Army story, and you talk about what's important to them, and so on and so forth. Does that sound impressive? It doesn't, does it? Now, I could add up everybody I talked to during that time. That might be a little more impressive. But I went back and read the announcement, and I looked at the duties, and in the duties it actually said, even though it wasn't in the qualifications, in the duties it said, if you get this job, you will be presenting information to large groups of people in conferences, on webinars, blah, 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 blah. So now I understand it's a large group is what they're looking for. So think back when you were in high school and college. There were assemblies that used to happen. I used to do assemblies often with my schools. And I would go in and I would have 100 to 150 students and faculty, and I would present the Army story. So I would come up with an eloquent way to write out how I presented to 100 to 150 students and faculty, and I would talk about the Army story. Okay, so the key word I used for the first time was presented, because that's the word they used. Level-wise, it's kind of two different things. I gave them, these are students and faculty. In recruitment, you know that that's entry level. They can see that this is my first recruiting job. But I gave it a little bit extra bump because I got 100 to 150 people in there, and that's a little bit more significant. But even so, we'll call it entry level. Now, my dates show that I did that job for 4 years, right? During that 4 years, I was a recruiter, I was a station commander, and I was a trainer. But I just kind of leave it at that, and I did that for 4 years. OPM said I had to have 1 year experience presenting information to groups of people. I just listed 4 in one job. I just showed I got 4 years of experience doing it. So I'm ahead of the game. Just keep in mind, just because OPM says 1 year is required doesn't mean 1 year is what the manager wants. right? That's just what OPM said the minimum requirements are, but we're not shooting to be the minimum person because that's probably not the person going to get selected. So I got 4 years to the 1 year. At some point in time, I applied and I got selected to go off into Army Special Forces recruiting or, working for the Green Berets. So it was my job to travel all around Europe, not a bad job, and find mid-career soldiers that would be interested in trying out for Special Forces and going off to assessment selection. But I got to think back to, but what was the requirement? The requirement was 1 year of presenting information to groups of people. So how did I present information to groups of people? I would set up briefings in theaters. I would have upwards of 200 to 300 mid-career soldiers. There's my level. Again, the number actually increased as well. I'd have 200 to 300. We wouldn't do them as frequently, right? And then I would go and talk to them about, I would present Special Forces, what the requirements were, what A&S would be like, all of those things. I would come up with an eloquent way to word that, but the key thing I would list off in there is presented again. So now I've repeated the key word, right? Presented has now been used twice in 2 different jobs, but I gave a different example of how I did presenting. Hopefully everybody's with me on this, right? And I did that job for a 4-year period as well. So now I have 4 years of entry level and I have 4 years of mid-career level. So I got 8 years of presenting because they never said the level I had to work at. I had 8 years of presenting information to groups of people to the 1 year they said was required. Finally, I was in my station one day. This guy used to come through every 6 months. He had long hair, was in a suit, but I knew he was in the Army. And he said, we're hiring. I said, for what? He said, I can't tell you. I said, well, you got to give me something. He said, it's a leap of faith. If you're interested, you just got to trust me it's a good home. So I filled this miserable 40-page application out, went through top secret SCI clearance, polygraph, psych evals, security evals, and eventually got hired on. Without me knowing it, I got hired on to be his replacement. 2 months later, he retired. I took over the program, and I ran a worldwide recruiting program for a very sensitive program within DOD, where my team and I went everywhere in the world that the military was at, right? So we were on the road a lot. I need to think about what was the key word, though, right? Key thing was presenting information to groups of people. Now, I did not have a massive team, but I have the entire world everywhere the military is at. So I was on the road as well as my team, and I had to run the program while I was on the road. But I could talk about doing briefings. The briefings are to senior people typically, because most of the people we were hiring were senior. However, I've already kind of given 2 examples of that. And in my case, I'm running this worldwide recruiting program. I kind of want to lean on that. So without getting myself into too much trouble, I had a situation where a group of occupations across all branches were blocking us from talking to their people. And they were doing it, and it was our own fault. Because before I got there, we were abusing this thing called the ALARAC message. And you may or may not know what that is, but basically it was a letter that said, I can take who I want when I want, and chain of command can't stop you. So we're at war, remember, and I would all of a sudden let's say I grab an E7, who's the platoon sergeant, supposed to lead this platoon in combat, and I grab him a month before they're deploying because I want to see if he's actually going to make it through our assessment selection course. And if he's not going to deploy with them on time. 9 times out of 10 or more, I won't tell you what the percentage was, but the failure rate was extremely high. It was designed this way. More than likely, the person wasn't going to make it, and they were going to have to try to catch up. And it just rubbed everybody wrong, and rightfully so. So I convinced my organization to stop using the ALARAC message, let us work with these organizations, and eventually they liked it so much because we came to an agreement that they not only were referring people to me, they were having me come speak regularly at their senior leader conferences. This is where we would have 450 to 500 of the senior-most leaders. So you'd have admirals and generals there. You'd have O5s and above typically, and E8s and E9s there were usually who were in attendance. And I would get up there and I would present in a secret level. I couldn't give them a classified top secret level because they weren't read on. But I would give them a secret level briefing on the program, what we were agreeing to do, what the process would be. But essentially, what am I doing? I'm presenting information. So I would come up with an eloquent way to talk about how I presented, all these agreements and this process and whatnot to 450 to 500 of the senior-most leaders in these occupations. So the level I'm working at is the very senior level, and I've now used the word presented for the third time. There is the repetition. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. That's what you're repeating. It's the key word or the key phrase, not the whole darn sentence, right? You're giving a different example of that. And I did that job for 6 years. Finally decided I could have stayed 7 more because you didn't have to leave once you came on board. But finally decided it was time, and I stepped out and I retired. All right. So if you go back and look at it, OPM looked at it and said you've got 4 years of entry, 4 years of mid, and then you got 6 years of seniors. You have 14 years of presenting information to groups of people. Okay. Now, what I didn't talk about is the accomplishment. Okay, we're going to talk about it on the next slide. But my accomplishment for that thing was actually I tripled our production in the next 3 years. So I would talk about how, you know, I presented the information to 450 and 500 of the senior most leaders and blah, blah, blah. That's my experience. My accomplishment was I tripled our production over the next 3 years. So meaning I did that first part so well, it was so successful that the numbers were tripled. That's the piece that we often don't see, is the accomplishment. If there's a dollar, a number, or a percentage that you can throw at this, it's very, very helpful to quantify your skill, to show us that you don't just get up there and talk, or like in my case, right, you're just up there running your mouth on. Does something happen when you do it? Or are you literally just up there running your mouth on? Okay? If you can show that something happens because of your hard work, to quantify it, that is very helpful to your cause as to why somebody should hire you over someone else. Think about how well you do the job, right? Think about, did you reduce the cost of it? Did you reduce time, effort, energy? Did you get an award for something? A lot of times I see awards written at the back of the resume and it just says, earned this, the secretary's award, but I don't know why you got it. Why not make that the accomplishment to whatever the experience was that you wrote out, okay? That's the two-part. Now, here's an example of a two-part answer. The first one I actually found on the internet years ago. First thing I would say about this is, if your resume says responsible for or duties include, get it off. Responsible for or duties include, tell me what you should have done, not what you did. Okay? I don't want to know what your PD says, because we all know you don't necessarily do everything that's on your PD. It doesn't tell me what your actual experience was. It tells me what they thought you were going to do. So take that stuff off. Should write it in plain language, and it should be in past tense. This was not, all right? And I laugh about this one. So here's the experience. Responsible for planning, executing, and coordinating special operations, mountain and desert training. The accomplishment was supposedly served as the primary instructor for all new soldiers in training. So let's break this down. I already told you about responsible for and duties include. The second part, I went to my supervisor at the time, who had never been in the military, and said, do you get this? And the comment I got back was, well, I've seen movies on special operations, so I guess I get the gist of it. Mountain training, willing to bet is done in the mountains. Desert training, probably done in the desert. That is what that meant to that individual. So you got to think about your audience, right? If you're doing this to SOCOM, they're going to get what you're talking about. But if you're applying to OPM, they're not. Or the potential is they're not. Okay, but let's just say that first experience statement I understood, and you're good to go. The second one was your accomplishment. Let me tell you how I read this accomplishment. Served as primary instructor. You could have been the only instructor. Come on, right? Because I feel like if there were 10 other people, you'd tell me there were 10 other people. I'm the primary out of 10 other people. That means you're in the top 10%. But it's probably just you, and it's just a special title you gave yourself. Okay, and nobody can really go and say no because you're the only instructor. But let's just say I gave you that. For all new soldiers in training, so do I get to make the assumption that you train 3,000, or should I make the assumption that you train 3? Because I'm leaning towards 3, because I feel like if it was 3,000, you probably would have told me that. That's kind of significant. 3, on the other hand, I don't really want to talk about that too much. Okay, so I rewrote this, put it into past tense, and put it into plain language. Developed and executed numerous sensitive and realistic training courses for nearly 1,500 personnel annually. Very strong experience statement. You did that first part so well that your accomplishment was you were rated as the #1 instructor over 20 peers in the last 3 annual performance reports. So compared to 20 other people, you are the rock star. And apparently it's not an anomaly because you've done it 3 years in a row. Can you see how this would stand out in comparison to just telling them that, yep, I've created training courses? This is how we stand out. This is how we get our resumes to go to the top of the pile. If you can give, and I understand that not every single thing out there is going to have an accomplishment to it, but there's probably a lot that should. Okay, think hard on these things. Did you make a difference in the procedure? It could be something as simple as the process I created is now the standard operating procedure. It's not a number, not a dollar, not a percentage, but it's the standard. I set the standard. Okay, think about that. Where do you find the information to build your two-part answers? For this is not all inclusive. These next two slides is to get your gears turning. Maybe a job description, maybe in your PD, maybe it's on your annual evaluations, maybe there's an award or a decoration that you got. I don't know. These are just ideas to get you thinking. Think about, what do you do outside of work, right? Maybe there was some sort of social organization you were at, you were volunteering somebody, maybe there was something you did while you were in school, maybe it was a detail or a special assignment. Again, I don't know. I just want to give you some ideas to think about where you can pull this from. All right. So hopefully at this point, you understand the three sections that we're going to focus on the job announcement, and you understand the idea behind the two-part answer and how that can really make you stand out. Now, let's go through the process of tailoring our resume. I'm going to walk you through how you can do several things. Number one thing is going to be reviewing the announcement. You're going to humor me. You're going to read through the announcement. I think I'm qualified for it. I think I understand what they're looking for. I think I like the job. I'm going to select in. If I don't like it, I'm going to select out and go find something different, right? And I'm going to walk you through each of these for what it looks like. Then you're going to get into the preparation. There's a preparation stage for steps 2 and 3 that you need to do for this process. So I'll walk you through what that looks like. Then after that, step 2, you're going to identify all the keywords and key phrases, and you're going to highlight them. When that's done, it's a mess. It's really hard to look at because not everything gets highlighted. So we want to align things. I like to make things simple, right? I'm a simple person. I like to have things just in bullets. Okay, so you are going to take all of the skills that they're saying you have to have, all the experiences, and we're going to bulletize them. Why do we do that? Because I'm going to show you how you can create the checklist that the HR people essentially have. The checklist is there for your taking. It's just you have to know how to build it. I'm going to show you how to build it. The beauty of this is essentially like we're giving you the answers to the test before you take the test. After we build out that checklist and we have the answers, then we're going to take the test, which is essentially then tailoring our own experiences to those requirements that are in that checklist. So I'm going to show you what this looks like. So in step 1, right, you're going to review it and you're going to determine the requirements, right? 1 year of graduate level experience or 1 year of specialized experience, equivalent to the GS5 or below, and here's examples of what experience looks like. You're going to decide, I think I'm qualified for it, I'm interested or not. Let's say you're interested and you say, I'm going to go for it. At that point, you got to do the preparation stage. You're all fed, so I can say you have access to Microsoft Word, so I don't even have to do the caveats to that. What you simply do, open up a blank Word document. Copy the 3 sections I told you that were important, in the order of importance. So you copy qualifications, paste it over there. Go to the occupational questionnaire, copy it, paste it under the qualifications, but only paste the questions that are talking about the skills you need to have. All right? Do not copy the questions that say things like, are you willing to relocate? What's the lowest pay grade you're willing to accept? That doesn't have anything to do with your resume, okay? And then copy the duties and paste it under the questionnaire. Once you've done that, you've got all 3 things on there. I can't really show you what that looks like because, I'm working within PowerPoint. But delete the duplicates. There's going to be a ton of duplicates. Matter of fact, most of it is going to be duplicated. Okay? Here's what you do. You never touch the qualifications. Qualifications were non-negotiable. We never delete anything out of qualifications. We go down to the questionnaire, and we might read, essentially, if you look at the qualifications, it might say, got to have 1 year specialized experience presenting information to groups of people. You go to the questionnaire, it says, tell us about your experience level presenting information to groups of people. It's the same skill. You already know because I told you have to talk about level anyways. Just make sure whatever you're saying your level is the example you're going to use when you respond to this. So go ahead and delete that questionnaire question because it's going to get addressed in the qualifications. Then you go down to the duties, and the duties oftentimes will say, if you get this job, you will be responsible for presenting information to groups of people. It's the same thing the qualifications said you had to do. So you can delete that one. And you're going to notice that there will be very few questions left in the questionnaire or duties remaining. Sometimes there's one or two outliers because sometimes it's not a requirement, but they're trying to get an additional feel for what experiences you have. So we would leave those there, but you get rid of all the duplicates. And so for the most part, what's left is going to be your qualifications. Again, some additional things sometimes, but that's what's mostly left. And this was the example, right? Education's pretty simple, so I don't really need to bring that into this because you're either going to have that or you aren't. You don't really tailor to the education side of it. You're tailoring to the experience side. So in here, I got to look through and say to myself, I need to identify all the keywords and the key phrases that they're telling me I have to have experiences in, right? So first paragraph was just where do you find the stuff, so that's not really anything to look at. Second paragraph, for all of you, you are never going to see on a job you're interested in. It says you have to have the ability. I'm going to focus on GS7 here. In GS7, it says eventually under the highlighted in red, it says specialized experience includes, but is not limited to, comma. And then it goes into what the skills are, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I'm going to highlight all of these different skills that they say I have to have, okay? All right, these are things I have to address. Now, I would have done the same thing for GS9, just to clarify if I had room, but again, you're going to notice GS9 is going to get pushed down here as I go through this process. So just keep that in mind. For today's training, I pretend like GS9 doesn't exist, but you would have to do GS9 if you thought you were qualified for it, okay? So now that I've highlighted everything, it's a mess, right? I've gone through, I've identified all the keywords, key phrases, and I've highlighted everything. It's hard to look at. So step 2 is done, but step 2 leaves me with a mess. So what I want to do is go to step 3, which is where I want to align everything. I really would like to get all the skills on a line by itself. I'm going to show you how easy this is. Up to this point, ask yourself, how hard has this been? I asked you to copy the qualifications, the questionnaire, and the duties, and paste it into a Word document, and then delete the duplicates. And then all I asked you to do is go back into whatever's left and highlight the skills they say you have to have. Like, I've done nothing magical here, right? This is such a disappointment, I'm sure, at this point. Okay, but that's my intention, is to show you it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you've gone through and highlighted everything, let's move on to the next step, all right? When we move on to the next step, what I'm going to do is this. It says in GS7, it says specialized experience includes, comma, but it's not limited to, comma. And then it goes into the first skill. I'm going to put my cursor right at the end of, but it's not limited to, comma, and I'm going to simply hit enter. And I knock it down to the next line. So now my first skill is assisting in the verification of reports against source accounts, comma. So I'm going to put my cursor right there at the end of that one because I want to get everything on the line by itself. And I'm going to hit enter again. And I knock it down to the next line. And now my first skill is all by itself on the line. And I am going to literally wash, rinse, and repeat. All I'm going to do is hit enter. At the end of each one of these, right, where it's a comma or a semicolon here, I hit enter. And I'm going to go to reconciling bank and other accounts, semicolon, hit enter. Verifying cash receipts, disbursement vouchers, hit enter. I think you get the point, right? I knock everything down to a line by itself. Now, you'll notice I didn't highlight ability, and I didn't highlight assisting in the. The reason is I'm going to put ability up on top. You can feel free to highlight it if you want. It's just I'm going to know all of these things are the ability to do stuff, all right? They're not as important as having 1 year of experience. So I don't want to get the two confused. Assisting in the, I didn't highlight it because sometimes all somebody has done is assist. In that case, they need to highlight it. But what if you are beyond assisting? What if you are actually the person that verifies reports? You don't want to say you assist. You want to say I verify reports or verified reports against source accounts, right? So I'm going to make the assumption that you're beyond assisting. So I'm not going to highlight it because I'm going to delete it. And what I'm going to do is everything that I didn't highlight there in those two things, I'm going to go ahead and delete. Okay, and my last step to this is I told you I was going to add the word ability back to the top of that. And I'm going to put dots in front of each one of these, only because it makes it easier for my eyes. And I know that, okay, now these are the things that I have to address. As I told you, GS7, having 1 year of experience is more important than the ability. So I'm going to flip-flop GS7 and ability 2. I'm going to put the GS7 on top of the ability 2. If I had room, and if GS9 wasn't down towards the bottom like that, but on a Word document, it wouldn't be a problem, I'm going to do the same for GS9. I'm going to put it up top. Okay, if you're not qualified for GS9, you don't even mess with it. All right? So for today's training, I'm going to pretend like I wasn't qualified for GS9. It's GS7, and the ability is all I have. I'm going to keep everything in red because that's what they're requiring of me. And I'm going to delete everything in black because that's the stuff that I don't need to worry about. It either doesn't relate to the skills or, as I told you, GS9 for training purposes, I'm going to remove. And that's what you're left with. And guess what you now have? You have the checklist or the cheat sheet that the HR people have. Not a hard process, right? Hopefully it's not a hard process. Hopefully everybody gets this. You now have the checklist. So let's take the test. Let's go ahead and take the test. It's real simple. You ask yourself, right, and this is how I do it for me. At Department of the Treasury, in my current role, have I verified reports against source accounts? Have I done the first skill? If the answer is yes, I've done it at my current job. I write out my experience and accomplishment. I just put a space between these two, and I write out my experience and accomplishment. And it might look something like this. Annually verified over 500 source reports and identified weak internal controls and accounting procedure. That's a very strong experience statement. Your accomplishment is created a new standard operating procedure which resulted in a 10% decrease in errors and $52,000 in labor savings. Very strong accomplishment. But that's only one answer under one skill that's required under my current job. Staying with my current job, I'm going to look at each and every one of these things and determine, do I have a two-part answer that I could give, or do I at least have an answer that I could give for each one for my current job at Treasury? If, whatever it is, you write out as many two-part answers as you can. Let's say, for the sake of arguments, you have not done verifying the accuracy of computations at your current job. So at Treasury, I have not done that. That's fine, but it is a requirement, right? It's a qualification. So somewhere in my resume, I better talk about how I verified the accuracy of computation. It doesn't have to be under my current job, all right? Now that I've written out all my two-part answers in black, those are the most important things to me because they're my responses to what you said, whoever posted it, that I had to have. But you can delete everything in red now because everything in red is what they're telling you is on the checklist. Well, they already know what the checklist is. You don't need to remind them. So I delete everything in red and I'm left with my two-part answers for my current most recent job. Sometimes you ask yourself, though, they didn't ask about X, Y, and Z, and we do that at this work, this type of work. That might be because OPM said these are the minimum qualifications. So if you know there's one or two other things that you normally do, add in an experience and accomplishment for that, or for those one or two things. Just don't go nuts with it, okay? You don't want it to be an 18-page resume. Once you have all your two-part answers in response to what they said you had to have for your current most recent job, copy it, go over to the resume builder, fill out the resume, right? Employer name, Department of the Treasury, job title, National Strategic Recruiter, address, blah, 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 DC, start date, end date, right? All that other stuff. And down at the bottom, circled in red, paste your two-part answers in there. And voila, your current most recent job is now tailored directly to the job announcement. Does that make sense, I hope? Hopefully that makes sense to everybody, all right? Now that I've done this for Treasury, my current most recent job, well, I had a job in the same field at Department of Transportation. So all I do is I back the process up. I back up and I start all over. At Department of Transportation, have I verified reports against source accounts? If so, I give a space between the two. I give a two-part answer. It might look something like that. Then I go through all the rest of them for Department of Transportation. I give as many two-part answers as I can. Once I've done that, I keep everything in black. I delete everything in red because that's their stuff. They already know. And then if I want to add in one or two more things, I add in one or two more things. And then I copy my two-part answers. And I go over here and I say Department of Transportation, Corporate Recruiting Manager. I give all of my information, circled in red down there. I paste in my two-part answers. And boom. DOT is now tailored to the job announcement. That is how this process goes. If you use this process, you are addressing everything that they are asking for, and maybe even then some, because you might have given one or two extra things that they weren't expecting. But you give yourself a better opportunity of being selected because you are addressing exactly what they are saying you must have. So I'm really hopeful this makes sense, okay? A couple more things I want to run through, and then we'll get into questions. In the how you be evaluated section, you notice I circled in red or boxed in red. It's telling you that if you embellish on your answers and your resume doesn't support, you're saying you're the best of the best of the best, they're going to just change your answer. So I'm not making this stuff up. It's in the actual announcement, okay? Summaries and objectives. I'm not a fan of objectives. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just not a fan. It's my own personal thing. I'm not a fan because objectives often sound, especially when somebody coming in at a kind of a more entry or an entry type level, they sound like, I'd really like to come to your organization, learn as much as I can, and then step off to what I really want to do. So everybody knows you're not going to stay forever, but I feel like it's poking them in the eye, and it's probably not the best way to do it. So I'm not a big fan of it. Summaries I am a fan of. I like summaries. It's the only place that you can really kind of build a picture as to what I'm about to read in the resume, right? HR doesn't look at your summary. It doesn't matter, right? So hired official's the only one that might. Now, a lot of you out there think, yeah, but in USA Jobs, it doesn't offer a space for summary. That's correct. It doesn't. However, you can cheat. Okay, it's not really cheating per se, but it's what I do. This is not endorsed by anybody, just so I'm clear. It's what I do. Under employer name, I write out professional summary. Job title, I write professional summary. Address, I say various locations. And I put Washington, D.C. since that's where my office is located currently. Start date, I say the oldest job I have on my resume, whatever that start date was, that's the date that I use for my start date. And then I say to present, right? I tell them 40 hours a week. And then down at the bottom circled in red is where I build out my summary. You don't have to do this. I do this, okay? But you don't have to. But if you want to do a summary, you can do this, and you can move it to the top of your resume, and it'll be the first thing that comes up. Okay, so totally unofficial, but you can do it. If you're eligible under special hiring authority, and if you probably are, you need to make sure that you give yourself that opportunity and turn in whatever documentation will support that, because there's a different list for the non-competitive authorities, okay? I already mentioned this earlier. Don't need your sensitive information. Black out your social, your date of birth. You can give that to the HR people if you get selected. And no photographs as well. Okay, this takes 2 seconds to run through. I just want to mention the resume builder. You are more than welcome to upload, or you are welcome to build your resume. I am a fan of the resume builder. I understand there's some managers out there that would prefer you not use it. I got it. They're going to look at it either way. Here's my concern. If you upload a resume without looking at the resume builder, oftentimes you skip or miss certain requirements that we have. If you do that, then you're all of a sudden no longer qualified, okay? So I use the builder because you can't screw it up. And I kid you not, I only use the builder, right? You can only have 5 different resumes on here, so at some point you have to remove them off. Once you apply, you can remove things out of there. They're not tied together anymore. I like to build a resume in there. So the first time I built it in there for an HR specialist, that became my template. Then I can go and click duplicate anytime I go and apply for an HR specialist job. Sometimes I say, wow, I really wrote that one well. I want that one to be my base one now. And I save that and it becomes my base and I remove the other one. But no matter what I do, if I apply to a job, I take a copy of my resume that I tailored to that job. I take a copy of the announcement and I take a copy of the answers that I gave in the questionnaire and I put it into a folder on my personal hard drive so I can go back and reference it if I ever get called up for an interview. Okay, it's just helpful. But if you're going to build a resume out or upload it, you click that plus sign down the bottom left-hand side. It asks you, do you want to build or upload? Again, upload's pretty self-explanatory. The building part, you click that. You name it. I like to name it the announcement number, and then I usually will give my name in there. Click add work experience. I come in here. All it's trying to tell you on this slide is most of the areas are required that you fill them out. There's only 2 that are exceptions. The second employer address line and salary. Everything else I have to have in there, okay? Education, everything on the left-hand side pretty much you have to have. Everything on the right-hand side for the most part you don't have to have. However, why would you not, like if your GPA was good, why wouldn't you tell them your GPA was good? If you're summa cum laude, why would you not tell them that? Why wouldn't you tell them your major? All right. More important, if you're looking for a job like an auditor where it says you got to have 24 semester hours of accounting type classes, why would you not tell them what you believe would cover your 24 semester hours? Or if you've got 30, I tell them about all 30 because it's going to look like this on your resume. Give them the things to make it easy. Okay. List it off on there. I do this because there's no degree required for my job, but just in case they don't look at my transcript, I want them to know that I do have a degree. Who knows? Excuse me. It might sway them somehow. I don't know. References, you can click available upon request, or you can simply type them out. I do this based off of how long my resume is getting. If my resume is getting too long, I just say available upon request. No matter what I do, even if I include it on my resume, I always take a copy separate with my references, because I had it plenty of times where I did include it on my resume, and a hiring official looked at me across the table in the interview and said, "Do you have a copy of your references?" And what I wanted to say was, "Yes, and so do you. It's on the back side of my resume right there in front of you." But I feel like that is not the way I want to end the interview. So I pull out a separate sheet of paper with my references, okay? Other qualifications. This is, if you couldn't find another place to put it, you can put it here, but I caution you on this. Remember I said a lot of times I find things at the end of the resume that could have been used to support your experience. This could have been the accomplishment for it. So for example, professional publications. Let's say you're applying for a job that says you need to have writing skills. And you know that you published in a certain journal. Well, if you put it back here, it's lost. But what if you go and talk about how well you write, answering to the requirement of that, and then you say, and it resulted in me being published in such and such a journal, March 2024. Now all of a sudden it means something. Well, you write so well that you're actually published. Okay? Don't let it get lost back here. If you can't find anywhere else to put it as an accomplishment, fine, put it back here. But awards a lot of times are thrown back here, right? You got the Legion of Merit, great. For what? Something you did, or just because? Like, it doesn't, you lose the meaning, okay? Cover letters are optional. HR does not look at your cover letter. I will tell you, most hiring officials don't look at your cover letter. However, I write a cover letter for every single job that I apply for. Why? Because I've met a handful of hiring officials that believe that the cover letter is the end-all, be-all. I completely and utterly disagree with that. But if that's what I got to do to make sure that I have an opportunity to get interviewed, then so be it. There is no format that's required for this. It can be whatever, but it's the only place you really do compelling language to explain why you think you would actually be the right fit for the job and how you would fit into their organization. All right? So I write a cover letter every time I do it. I just go in and tweak it just a little bit. All right? Last slide, and then we'll get into questions. Write in plain language. Oh my goodness, write into plain language. I mean, I got it. You guys are all smarter than everybody else. But you know what? If the hiring official can't understand what you are saying, and I see this a lot in the technical fields, and I'm not trying to pick on people. I'd like to be straight up honest with you, right? I assume everybody's military here, so you've had some straight up talk at some point in your career. If they can't understand what you're saying because the job that you're in is really, really technical, and they are not in that technical field, I'm afraid that it's going to get lost in translation. So be careful, okay? Show your specialized experience. I think I beat that one down. They need to see that you're qualified for the job based off of what they told you you had to have for skills. Avoid acronyms. What you think the acronym means and what I think it means might be two different things. And it's not good when that's the case. So at least spell it out once. True story. Nothing to do with resumes, but true story. When I first retired out of the Army, I went to work at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency as a contractor. I was only there for a very short period of time, 2 months, and I was hired on at OPM. Before I started working there, I got offered the interview with OPM, and then I actually, day 2, went to the second interview, and it was what I wanted to do. I really wasn't excited about the job at NGA. It paid well, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do for work. I got to OPM, and one of my colleagues said to me, "Well, where did you come from?" And I said, "Well, technically I came from NGA, but I was only there for a short period of time." She said, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that you left the National Gallery of Arts to come over here." I had no idea there was another NGA out there, because obviously the world that I worked in, there was only one NGA, okay? Spelling and grammar checks should go without saying, but apparently it doesn't, because we see some pretty atrocious resumes. So think about that from a first impression perspective. Have someone review your resume before you submit it. If you like the process that I just showed you, I also gave you something else. You no longer need to have a resume subject matter expert to look at your resume to give you input. You need somebody that has one skill set, and that is they have to be literate. Kid you not, that's it. You put your checklist down that you built after I showed you how to build it, and then you put your resume down that you tailored to that checklist, and you tell them, I need you to start with the first bullet, go through my resume, and write down how many months and years you found in there that I talked about I had experience doing that skill. Do that for all the things on the checklist, and then walk away. because that's what HR is doing. It's their first look, fresh eyes looking at there, they're bumping what they know they have to look for with your resume. Very simple, okay, because you have that checklist. So last but not least, remember sometimes jobs close early and you're going to want to get your resume dusted off and tidied up and turned in really quick, okay? So that was a lot of information in a short period of time. I know an hour and a half doesn't feel short, but it does when I'm trying to rush through all of these things. So let me ask this. Are there questions? And if so, wait a minute. So it looks like we get a chat open here. Oh, if there are questions. All right. So bear with me. I'm going to just start reading off the questions in the chat. All right. If that works for you. If you need to go, I totally understand you need to go. I appreciate you all. I appreciate your service. I appreciate that you came today. And hopefully this helped you. I hope I didn't waste your day. Right. If anything, I got you out of an hour and a half of work. So that helped. But hopefully that's not why you were here. All right. Okay, so MOS, appreciate you presenting today. I appreciate that. Would you be sharing the presentation slides later? Yes. I will send them over to Ms. Judkins because she's got the ability to send them out to the group. Someone says, thank you, I appreciate the guest and topic. Okay, that's for you. Someone got Jackson 5. There we go. I know I'm aging myself, but, you know, it is what it is. We got to have fun occasionally, right? DOD is notorious for creating jobs with highly specialized qualification questions. Yes, they are. I'm not trying to dog anybody, but since you opened up the door, let's go ahead and do it. No. I've never applied to a DOD job, and primarily because of the fact that DOD also has a tendency to say there's an equivalency from what you were in the military, your grade, to what you should be eligible for in government. And there is not. Right? There is no equivalency. Now, there's a document that DOD does have, but it was meant for per diem. And it says like an 06 is the equivalency of a GS-15, but it gives 06s the mentality that, well, then I'm qualified as a GS-15. And sometimes when you have to go back and say, I'm not saying you don't have a lot of experience and qualifications or anything like that, but what I am saying is it's too generic of a term because we have GS-15 doctors. So if you are not a doctor, then no, you are not qualified at that GS-15 level. And just because you are a full bird colonel, right, or a captain in the Navy, that kind of thing, doesn't mean that you are qualified at every single GS-15 job, okay? So I personally have stayed away from DOD because it can get kind of convoluted, and oftentimes you are asked, you know, granted, I've been a Fed for a while now, but oftentimes when you're first getting out of the military, you are specifically asked about, you know, what grade were you in? And I feel like that's not fair because, you know, no big secret. If you figured it out, I was a recruiter, I was enlisted. I'm a retired E8. All right. But if you looked on that scale, an E9, they say is the equivalency for per diem as a GS9. So you're talking about somebody that could have served 30 years, been in charge of thousands of people at the same time, and that person probably has a bachelor's, if not a master's, and you're telling me that individual is the equivalency of a GS9, somebody that could have just gone through, got their bachelor's degree, and then did 2 more years and got their master's, so they're 24 years old with no experience, and they're equivalent? I disagree. So that always kind of concerned me. Someone said, good old selection, some hard days at Camp McCall, nice. So we got an SF person out there. You probably, I'm not going to get into it, just so I'm clear, but we used to poll occasionally from the SF guys to consider this other program as well. Someone says, please make the presentation available. I will. I absolutely will. Okay, yeah, you mentioned that also. Sorry, and I'm catching up. Just bear with me. Do you recommend using the resume builder over the actual resume? I do. Again, I'm not saying it's required. I'm just saying that I prefer it because you can't screw it up. Like I said, I'm pretty much a no-frills person. If it's easy, I'll take it. If it gets me what I need to get the job done, I'll take it. I'm afraid of messing up somewhere and missing something. So I use the builder and have for what am I at now? Almost 13 years. Once the resume is submitted, what is the process? How does the submitted resume move forward? All right, so simply this. The resume goes into the system. So when you go and do the when you're putting your resume and your supporting documents, and then you do the occupational questionnaire or vacancy question, you are no longer in USA Jobs. You're in whatever that talent acquisition system is. Many of us are using USA Staffing. About 75-80% of government uses USA Staffing. But then there's a whole plethora of other, things out there. Grass ring, monster. I don't know what all the other ones are. But when you're filling that out, that's all in the talent acquisition system of the agency, whatever they're paying to use. All right. Then when the job closes, the first thing that's being looked at is eligibility. HR goes and checks, were you eligible to apply under the job that you applied to? Because remember, I told you, we post it sometimes in different ways. Sometimes it's with all U.S. citizens. Sometimes it's current and former feds. So we want to make sure you were eligible when you applied. After eligibility is determined, then they're going to go on and check, do you meet the minimum qualifications? If you meet the minimum qualifications, and sometimes this is done in conjunction, but in theory, minimum quals are checked first, and then they go and rate and rank you to see where do you place as far as, what category do you fit in, all right? Qualified, well qualified, best qualified. After that happens, the best qualified category in this scenario is what is referred. So the certificate of eligibles, the list, is referred over to the hiring official. Then the hiring official is notified, you've got a list to look at, he'll take a look at the list. That individual looks at the list and says, I want to interview, A, B, and C, however many that they have. Some agencies have a limit, meaning they must interview X amount of people from this many lists. Others say it's up to you, totally up to you, right? And some actually say it has to be a structured interview, or it can be a manager's interview or an unstructured, all right? Just depends on the location. Then the interviews, people get invited, and then interviews happen. When the interviews are done, now sometimes I have heard, although it's rare, some managers will actually call references before interview. That's pretty rare, because usually that's a waste of everybody's time, right? That usually doesn't happen, but it can. So typically you do the interview, sometimes a second interview, depending upon the level that you're coming in at, with an executive, for example, and then they go and make a selection. The hiring official says, I'm going to select Todd, so they send a note back down they send essentially the package, right, the list back down to HR. It's all electronic. And HR has, this is the one I want to select. Todd is being selected. And then at that point, they have their internal process of how they go about contacting Todd. Usually HR reaches out to Todd, gives the tentative job offer. Once you get the tentative job offer, you accept it or you don't. Assuming you accept it, right? And usually there's no negotiating once you're a Fed, but if you were trying to get in, sometimes you can negotiate. Some agencies don't, but sometimes you can. So if you did negotiate at that point in time, you got to do it before you sign the tentative offer, just FYI, all right? And then they're going to run your background investigation. They're going to have you turn in, I need to see a copy of your D-214 without it being blacked out. I need to see your transcript without it being blacked out. Whatever that stuff was, they're going to ask for that additional information. And then they run your background investigation. When it finally is good and completed, then you get the official offer, which is the same thing as the tentative one that you signed. It's just official now because you passed all the wickets and you're good to go. And then you onboard. So that's a lot very quickly, right? So somebody says, I had to leave for another meeting, outstanding. Someone said, thank you, this is great. Can we get your contact information? So you can, but here's the only thing I'm going to say. I cannot review resumes, just so we're clear. I can't be the one to tell you your resume looks good with this or it doesn't. It's conflict of interest. And the other thing that I say to you is this. Treasury's got 108,000 employees currently right now. I brief weekly to the public as well. Okay, when I was at OPM in a 7-year period, I briefed 60,000 documented people. So I cannot do one-on-one sessions with anybody. All right, so just throwing that out there because if I'm being honest, this is a part of my job, but it's not really the big part of my job. My main thing is being, working strategically with IRS and all the other bureaus on their recruitment efforts and how we can help out. Okay, so I just throw that out there just as a caveat because I want to make sure that I'm managing expectations. I do get asked a lot if I would just once take a look at the resume. I can't do it. All right, someone said, great presentation. Thanks so much. Thank you. Great presentation. All right, I appreciate all the kind comments. I appreciate that. Let's see. Someone said, thank you. It's very interesting. I'll use it this week and I'm applying for a few positions. Hopefully those positions are within Treasury. That's my hope. Someone said, what can I apply for if I have a VA and I was an E5? I'm currently working. I could not tell you. I mean, there are over 300 different occupations. I could not tell you what all of the requirements are. Your bachelor's could be, in any one of the things, right? A BA covers a lot. So I don't know. And again, don't let rank dictate a thing. Okay? And I'm going to say this, I usually don't like to even mention this, but because you're all vets, and I'm going to go ahead and say this. I retired as an E8, and I took the first job I took was at OPM for government, and I came in under a 13-14. So I started as a 13, and a year later I was a 14. All right, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because don't let your current or your past grade in the military dictate your value. The skills that you have are what dictates it. If you can show you meet the qualifications, then by goodness, you meet the qualifications. There's nothing that frustrates me more than when my fellow veterans are told, just get in. Take whatever you can get and just get in. And then I see them take, a lower grade after having 25 years in the military, a lower grade position, and then they're stuck because you can't just all of a sudden go and say, well, I took a 9, but now I'm going to apply for a 13. HR isn't going to allow that to happen because you can't. The rules under merit promotion don't allow that. All right? You can't just jump that high. So now you're stuck. Now you have to go from a 9 to an 11, 11 to a 12, a 12 to a 13, then to a 14, and so. So I don't want you doing that. So it frustrates me. What I would tell you is this. There are documents on USA Jobs that actually say it's occupations by college degree. It's on USA Jobs. Matter of fact, it's a good point. I probably need to just, you know what? Let's do this. I'll do you one better. Before I even say what I was about to say. I'm going to write myself a note so I don't forget. And I will send it. And just bear with me. Okay. I will pull the college degrees by occupation, and I will send it when I send out over the slides. All right. And that can be sent out to everybody out there. So that way you have, I forgot to turn my camera back on, sorry. But that way you'll have it out there, all right? And then you can go and look at it. But don't worry about your pay grade when you're in the military, right? Now, as an MBA, working on an MBA, you are eligible to be considered under either internships, under pathways. You're eligible to be considered under recent grads when you are in your final year of your MBA. You are also eligible under the PMF program, which is the Presidential Management Fellows. It's only for advanced degrees, masters and above. All right, and I don't know, where you're at right now, but you essentially start off typically as a 9, 11, or a 12 in the PMF program. All right, and it's the premier leadership program for government. So just something, food for thought. Someone says, awesome, thank you so much for all the information. Someone says, why would a position be posted more than twice when an applicant was deemed highly qualified? The top of the 3 groups. Why would the hiring manager repost the same position even though the hiring manager sees? No, I'm not talking about reposting. What I'm talking about is when we initially post a job out there, truth of the matter is most jobs are posted under merit promotion, which means that the general public doesn't have access to it. All right, vets do if you're eligible under the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act, VEOA, but most of the public doesn't have access to it. It's posted under merit promotion. All right, so usually, though, what we try to encourage, from my perspective, is let's see what all is out there. So we encourage posting of merit promotion and delegated examining, which means all U.S. citizens, so the same job on the same day is posted twice. Once for merit promotion and once for delegated examining. It's the exact same announcement, except it says that it's merit promotion or it says it's delegated examining. So that means the hiring rules are different. Remember I told you merit promotion, veterans preference doesn't apply. Under delegated examining, veterans preference does apply. So there are 2 separate lists that will be created. 2 separate lists that say this is who is best qualified and this is who is best qualified. If you're eligible under both of those, you will more than likely end up on both. Like if you make one list, you're going to make the other list. And it just means they can hire you under whatever list. If you're 30% or more disabled vet, they can hire you under a non-competitive list. Even though you came up on the delegated examining list, and even though you came up on the merit promotion list, again, I'll tell you the secrets to all of this. They can go and say, well, we really liked you. We want to hire you. We're going to actually hire you off of the off of the non-competitive authorities, because, we are asked, how are we doing on 30% or more disabled or Schedule A persons with disabilities? So we're going to go ahead and hire you under that, because we can. Even though we would have hired you under delegated examiner merit promotion, but out of convenience, we're going to hire you under this one. Okay? So don't think of it as they're posting once, they got who they want, and then they turn around and post it again. That's not what we're talking about. Talking about the fact that they post it twice and they get 2 lists or potentially 3 lists, because the hiring authorities dictate there's different rules. Someone says, I'm having an issue where a previous agency job gets me past the 52 weeks for the qualification based on time and grade. Unfortunately, I have been having it happen where that SF50 is not being looked at, even though I am including it, and I'm getting erroneously disqualified due to not having time and grade. So then I can't say that you're necessarily going to win this thing, but what I would do back to that agency is I would contact them separately, and I would send them the information and say, I need you to look at this. I'm disputing this because you're saying I'm not qualified. I am qualified. And here's how, and I included this in my application when I applied. So I'm asking, would you please take a look at this again, all right? Because sometimes somebody misses something. They're human, right? I'm not saying they're perfect, but sometimes somebody misses something. But I would go and politely bring it to their attention, all right? And I would email them to that email address, and I would contact them. Someone says, I would like to see if my other group might enjoy this presentation. Okay, that's... and here's what I will say to you is this also. I do this on a monthly basis to Treasury in general. I do this one and interviewing in general. But I also do this to the public every week, right? So yesterday was Wednesday, so I did it yesterday on Wednesday. In 2 weeks, I will do it on Wednesday again. Next week, I will do it on Thursday, and in 2 weeks, I will do it on Thursday again. So I leapfrog Wednesday, Thursdays, because I have a requirement that I have to be in the office on the Wednesday that I do the Thursday briefing. But I do them for the general public. So if you have family and friends that are interested in something like this, this presentation is available to them as well. And when I send the email over, I'll give you the link to where I have them posted. I got them posted on USA Jobs, but so does everybody else. But I'll give you the link to where we have them posted on Treasury's site, so that way you can use it for your family, friends, and whoever. Someone says, I was unable to attend. Will the slides be emailed out? They will. The slides will be emailed out. It's probably going to be very confusing because they don't make a whole lot of sense if you don't go through the presentation. Someone says, I've been labeled as ineligible for positions that I'm overqualified for, even though I have over 10 and a half years in HR. So the only thing I can say to that is, there's a difference, and maybe that's all and then, someone else responded and said, ask within 24 hours of getting that denial. Ask within 24 hours of getting that denial email for a secondary regret. Exactly. Thank you, Randall. But the other thing I would say is, if they're telling you are ineligible, and you can clearly show, and remember, there's a difference with eligibility and qualifications, right? Eligibility just means you were allowed to apply under the authority they posted the job under. If they're saying, or you're feeling I'm overqualified, but they're saying you're ineligible, then that means whatever you were applying under, for some reason, they are thinking you were not allowed to apply for that job. So again, I don't know why they would. I don't know what your current situation is, but I agree with Randall. I would contact them immediately, and if need be, I'd send an SF50 and say, hey, tell me how I'm not eligible, right? I'm a current Fed. I'm a U.S. citizen, so delegated examining is good to go. And I'm a current Fed in the competitive service, and have been, so I have status, so tell me how I'm not eligible, right? I would absolutely, I'd be polite, right? But the only other, so I guess I could have read on. So there was more discussion. I have and still don't get my resume reviewed. So I would contact their IT. That's me. Okay, if that job is just like, that was the job for you, I would contact their IT. And just tell them, hey, I've responded. They're not giving me response back. They did not give me the option. They said I was ineligible when I'm clearly eligible. So I need somebody to review this. I don't know how far that they'll take it, but I'm just telling you, the reality and over time is if it gets blown out of proportion too far, it is possible for them to go back and have to redo the whole process. All right. And someone says, it's been the story of my whole experience here at IRS. I have an MBA in project management experience, and they don't even consider that kind of experience because you didn't come up through their ranks. So shouldn't be possible, right? I mean, if you are qualified, well, here's the deal. Let me take a step back. Because sometimes it's not HR, right? Like, in other words, sometimes you get referred, but the hiring official, for whatever reason, and I don't know what that reason is, doesn't select you for an interview. If you're qualified and best qualified, right, whatever that looked like for that time, you should have made it onto the cert. Now, sometimes we say to ourselves, oh, I'm qualified, and so other times I will say you are. But what did your resume reflect? Sometimes if you go back and look at your resume and compare it to the announcement in the way that we just talked about writing your resume and creating that checklist, see if you addressed all 8 of those things they said you had to have. Because sometimes people will find I missed something. So even though you and I both know you are qualified for the job and best qualified for the job, if you don't have it conveyed on your resume, it doesn't matter. It happened to a very good friend of mine, and he'd even gone through my briefing. But later, when he went back and looked at it, he realized he missed something. Okay, I knew he was qualified, but he didn't show HR he was qualified. If you make it through that and you get onto the cert, then at that point it's up to the hiring official, right? The hiring official has to be the one to decide, I want to interview this person or I don't want to interview this person, and then that's out of my lane. I can't really tell you why that is, right? Sometimes it's a feel, I don't know. Someone says, I talked to someone the other day when I was erroneously not referred. The HR typically only looks in the IRS system to see your time and grade. That I don't know. All right, I don't know. I'm not tied to the system. Someone says that's how they fall short. I would recruit other vets, but I have to be honest with them that their experience may not all be considered, because in the competitive service, we bring more to the table than most applicants, and that can be challenging to those that don't have a military background. So, well, again, if you notice, and I think I threw it out there, most jobs are not posted out there under delegated examining, right? Most of them are posted out there under merit promotion, which doesn't allow for, and granted, vets can get in typically, but it doesn't allow for others out there. It also doesn't allow for veterans preference. There is no veterans preference with merit promotion. What is the difference, or is there a difference when a detail IRS is posted on USA Jobs versus the service-wide opportunity listings like not to exceed a year? I'm not familiar with whatever the details that are posted out there on USA Jobs, but what I would say is, you know, a not to exceed is a temporary job, right? So normally under a not to exceed, there are different rules for getting credit, right? In other words, like a not to exceed, for example, if you are a temporary employee, which is your not to exceed 1 year employee, right? Term is 1 to 4 years. Temporary employees don't get certain benefits. Temporary employees cannot be promoted, right? So there's a loss of things. So I would say, as far as details go, and I guess I'm surprised that a detail, I guess maybe they're looking at a detail that they're posting out there because they're going to do it for a certain amount of time. But I would say, without looking at them, that more than likely that would be the difference. One of them is going to be under a temporary appointment, which there's different rules for what you're eligible for as far as benefits. And then the other one is not under a temporary appointment per se, okay? I'd have to see them to know specifically, because it's a little hard for me to you know, I'm shooting from the hip on that one, right? And if I don't have the full answer, I try to tell you I don't have the full answer. I don't ever claim to be the all-knowing, all-being, all-doing, okay? Someone says, I've been told to apply for jobs externally because I'm stuck at a low grade because I could not get in for 10 years. I don't know how IRS works, but here's what I would say. I wouldn't limit yourself to IRS. All right. I am an advocate for staying in Treasury. All right. I admit that. That's obviously part of my job. But what I would say to you is this. Sometimes, you know, someone's perception can be wrong. And sometimes if you're stuck there, I don't know specifically why you're stuck there. I don't know. Right. It's possible that you're stuck there for, some reason that you don't have any control over. So if that's the case, then it might be time to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to go somewhere else and see what else. The other thing I would recommend is this. IRS has, just my own experience, I've never done one, but my own experience is IRS has a lot of internal details. I don't know how that affects everybody out there. I don't know if it's in all occupations. I just know that if anybody's doing details, it's IRS. So my recommendation would be to try to get into a detail that maybe steps you up a little bit and shows somebody that you were able to do a detail 4 to 6 months and gave you more experience, but also kind of gave them the understanding that it was done at, outside of your current role, but obviously at a little higher grade. So that way maybe the mindset will change. Okay. It's very hard for me to address specific situations inside of an organization that I'm not in. But I think that would be the route that I would try going. Someone like the idea of the PMF program. I think the PMF program is a great program. And if you're eligible for it, it's just one more mechanism you can use. I wouldn't limit yourself to it. I would try others, right? Someone says, why are positions posting now with a deadline to apply, but also state or first 100 employees? Well, typically the reason that is done, there's 2 ways that they can do this. Typically it's done because they are getting too many people applying. Okay. I did see an announcement the other day. Ironically, it was somebody had told me about this. It was an IRS one. It had over 2,000 applications and it hadn't closed yet. All right. So a friend of mine was applying. I've not ever seen this, but somehow my friend could see, and maybe it's changed. I haven't applied for a job in a while, but they could see how many people had applied for the job. And maybe it's a new change on USA Jobs that I just haven't seen. But it had like 2,300 applications had gone into it. Now, here's the deal. HR gets to sort through all 2,300. By law, they have to go through all of them. There's no way they can't say, we're only looking at the first 1,000. Nope, because that's discriminating. Can't do it. So, oftentimes what happens is one of 2 things. Either they post a job for 5 days or less. And just to be clear, if you post it less than 5 days, you have to be able to justify it when MSAC, who is OPM's auditing arm, comes through. Because it feels like you're just trying to do pre-selection, where you've already selected somebody, you're posting for the sake of posting, but pre-selection is illegal, we're not allowed to do it. All right. So usually though, they either reduce the number of days they're going to post the job to reduce the number of applications, or they say, 100 is it. We know we're going to get a ton of applications, so we're only going to take the first 100. And when we hit 100, they can either close at 100, or typically what they do is go to 11:59 p.m. Eastern time that day and close it. So they might get 110, 115. Right, but that would be why that they typically do that, is they're reducing the number of applications. Someone says, do you record any of these? So I don't, and let me explain why. I am currently working on a script. So a lot of what I said, not a lot, but parts of what I said, my personal experiences and things like that, will never make it through if it's a scripted thing, right? Because a scripting is going to be out there forever. So basically, I have to script out a video, and I have to do a video. We are working on it. I say we. I'm working on it. There's no we. And I'm going to create a video, not just for this. I'll create one for Pathways. I'll create one for interviewing, and I'll create one for Navigating USA Jobs. But up until Monday, it's been me and me alone trying to stand this whole program up. And it has not been easy. So I was actually told maybe I need to think about holding off on doing these kind of things, but I feel like it's important to do these. So I said, no, I'm going to go ahead and do them, with the caveat that I will get a video out there at some point, but at least until I get the video out there, I'll do these for the public once a week. I'll do these for internal once a month, because you can still attend the public ones. The public just can't attend the ones that we advertise internally. All right, I do these things like that where, I was asked to come over and present to you. So I offer some other things to try to do this, kind of to fill the void in between. But eventually there will be a video out there. Someone says, so this is clarification. Well, what I was asking is that if an applicant made the merit promotion and non-competitive list as a highly qualified, but the hiring manager rejects that applicant and continues to advertise the same job, even though the hiring manager has at least one or more highly qualified applicants. So what I'm getting at is, how do you deal with a hiring manager who already knows who they want to hire and keeps reposting the same job? So how do you fight that? All right. So internally, that should already be addressed. I don't know how, I will tell you what I know here at Treasury headquarters level. We post a job out there, and if we don't get what we think we're looking for, we repost. I will tell you, if we don't get it that next time, what we're looking for, we better find it. Because there's going to be a problem and a lot of people questioning, what is it that you don't think you're getting? Because, much to the next comment, which sounds like the hiring manager just going through the motions because they've already picked somebody, right? We're not allowed to do that. So the only way that I would say to fight this is, again, you could ask leadership and say, can somebody check on this? Because this feels like, I'm qualified for the job, or I believe I'm qualified for the job. I believe, that I'm who they're looking for. But yet, I keep making the cert. Several people are making the cert, and the hiring official is not hiring anybody off of it. So, it's possible that they're selecting. If it happens once, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily what's happening, because I've seen it happen for us as well. What was on there, the quality that was on there. I've gone through interviews with people, and we just decided after the interviews, they are not who we are looking for. In some cases, it's like they obviously lied on their resumes because the questions we're asking, they can't answer. So we repost, right? And I don't know if that was the case. I don't know. But what I would say is, I would go back and ask the question if this is something where they post and then people get the cert, but then nobody was interviewed, and so they then repost again, or maybe they did interview. It's hard to know what's happened in there. The only thing I ever caution anybody on is, again, and it happened to my buddy. My buddy swore, I'm qualified, I'm good to go. I know in my heart of hearts he's qualified, but when I saw his resume and we looked at it compared to what they were announcing, he wasn't. Now, in this case, if you made the cert, you were, right? Because if you made the cert, then you are in the best qualified category, so you are potentially what they're looking for. Doesn't necessarily mean that the hiring official thinks the same way. Maybe there's something else the hiring official's looking for. I don't know. But somewhere along the way, that HR, right, whoever's running this, HR should be saying, or I would assume they could be saying, enough is enough. You've got a list right there. You need to make a selection off of that list. We're not going to keep reposting this thing. So if you think that you're being done wrong, I'd take it maybe to the HRO first and talk to the HRO and see, if you can get some resolution with that. Or at least bring it to the HRO's attention so that way they're being aware of it and letting, it's almost like in a polite way of making them know that, look, we're watching and we're seeing this habit, if it's a habit. And I don't know, again, it could be very innocent. I don't know. In the past few years, they created a shared administrative support position, but on several occasions they have quit. How come they just upgrade the employees? How come they just upgrade the employees that are already doing the work? I'm just asking. All right. Are you saying that they are upgrading them, or they're not upgrading them? I guess is what I'm confused by. When somebody leaves, somebody else is doing the work, why aren't they just upgrading? So here's the deal. If you're asking why don't they, you can't give someone a promotion. We're a competitive organization. You can't give someone a promotion. You can't just say, hey, you know what, today I'm just going to give you this 13 even though you were a 12. You can't just do that. Right? It has to go through a competitive process. People have to have the option. Otherwise, we end up in a situation that we're just kind of, talking about, where it's favoritism. Where all of a sudden it's, all right, you wash my hand, I wash your hand. So you know what? When Todd leaves over there, I'm just going to give you the job. I got it. It's a common practice in the private sector, but in government, because they try to think about this as how do we be fair and impartial? That's how fair and impartial can be easily crushed. Okay. And so without that becomes an issue. So that would be why they don't just upgrade somebody. Now, can they? They can if that person applies and they go through the whole process and then they are selected, right? That is very possible. It's just they have to go through the whole process, okay? And yes, it does mean that all of a sudden we are adding to how long it takes. Someone says IRS likes to use rosters. What's the deal with these? I don't know. I'm not a part of the IRS, so I don't know why they're using rosters. If you're talking about even like shared certificates as well, that's being pushed, right? Just so I'm clear on that. That is something that is being pushed. Like I'm in meetings with OPM often, and the shared certificates are coming down often, but I don't specifically know why they're using these rosters. You'd have to ask, internally why they're doing that. Because again, I'm not tied to the day-to-day operations of any of the bureaus. Someone says, yes, that's a thing now to see how many applicants applied. Okay, so you're referring to the numbers, right? Oh my gosh. So hopefully everybody saw this, right? This is a job that IRS put out to the public. 14,188 jobs. I'm willing to bet my paycheck that was a remote job, right? Because that's what we're seeing them in, is the remote jobs. Because more and more the remote jobs are going away. Mine went away, right? I'm now back, 50%, we'll be 50% in the office here soon. So, all right. Last, I appreciate you sharing that. So again, it's been a bit since I've actually applied to a job, but I had a friend show me that, and I was like, holy cow. Someone says, thanks, have a good day. Looking forward to the slide deck being shared. Yep, I absolutely will make sure that I get that. And then someone's saying, whoops, it's jumping on me. There are 6 9-month roster postings. I was actually hired under one of them. I don't know. Yeah, I honestly don't know, right? As you all probably are familiar with, we delegate all hiring authority down to the bureaus themselves. Oh, it wasn't a remote job. Oh my gosh, wow, I'm shocked. Okay, that's not a good feeling, because my son is a junior in college right now going for cyber, right? So that's not a good, that's a lot of people. But anyways, we delegate, all the hiring down to the bureaus themselves. We are not privy to what happens on a day-to-day basis. All we get is occasionally we go back and ask for some data on it to try to find out, like, how many of these might they be going after, or whatever the case is. We don't audit them, right? There's a group within, Treasury where I'm at right now. Our sister team, I always forget the exact wording. I think it's strategy, evaluation, and assessment. And analysis. They have an accountability team, right? That does actually, go through and not necessarily audit, but does go through and review, and try to see, like, what are you doing, and what have you been up to. And they've got their various different, things they check out. For me, it's just, it's recruitment. So a lot of these questions, just so we're clear on this, a lot of these questions are staffing questions. And for me, I'm not a staffer. Never have been a staffer. I've never been operational HR in the federal government. I've always been in recruitment. Now, I know a lot about the rules, the policies, and the regulations when it comes to staffing, because I was required to at OPM. But I don't, like, if you told me today, Todd, I used to be DEU certified, and I'm no longer DEU certified because it just is not necessary for me. But if you told me today I need you to go through and adjudicate veterans preference, I couldn't even tell you where to start, because I haven't done it actively. And back then I learned it and then took the test and never applied it, right? So it's basically a lost skill. So a lot of, what I'm talking about, or a lot of these questions have been kind of come down to staffing. So in very, it depends on where you're at. In a lot of the bureaus, just so you know, the staffer is also the recruiter. You all at IRS have recruiting teams, but you also have the staffing personnel. 2 people, totally different, right? OCC has the same thing, but most of our bureaus, the staffer is also the recruiter. So they're tied to it a little bit more. But I am more what you would picture as, you guys have recruitment teams that focus just on finding the talent. They don't deal with what happens after somebody applies. And that is basically what my experiences have been the whole time, right, is finding the talent. All right, so it's very new. I saw one that was posted the other day with a 2-week time frame for the first 100 application that closed the next day. Yeah, and I've seen, I've seen those before, and that's why I usually say, if after I guess let me say it like this. If you are using that auditor, right, you're an auditor, I would go and find a job announcement out there, even if you're not looking to apply for it right now, or even if you have your old job announcement. I would tailor a resume based off of that, so I have it sitting on USA Jobs as my base template. Then if you see a job like you're mentioning on there, where it says, only 100 applications are going to be received, or 25 or whatever, then I would go ahead and apply with that announcement because, again, like I said, 85, 90% of it should be good. So there's a chance that you might make it through this process and get the best qualified based off of that. But in the meantime, you've applied, right? So you're a part of the 100. But then I would go back that night and quickly try to do whatever tweaks I need to that 10%. And then if they're still open, then I would go back and hit update, right? Because apply usually used to change to update. And then you can click on it and update your new resume. And then that's the one that HR is going to look at. Okay, but at least if the job did close quickly, like you just mentioned, you have an opportunity to be considered. Whereas if it closed before you got a chance to tweak your resume, you would never even have the opportunity. So that would be what I would recommend. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. Are there anything else? I don't want to leave without leave somebody hanging here. If there's not, I'm gonna turn it back over cautiously. Right, I'm gonna stop sharing here. And it is all yours.
Todd, thank you so much. This was such a good presentation. I really appreciate your time and taking the extra time to answer all those questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Marie, I appreciate that you asked, and I would tell everybody out there that the only reason we're doing this is because I was asked to do it. This isn't because I said, hey, I should do this. It's because I was asked. So, I would like to give credit. Ms. Judkins here, was the one that came forward and said, is this possible? So kudos to you for asking the question because I appreciate it. And so, anytime that we can help, that's kind of the purpose behind this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a good one.